Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Working people will keep fighting for higher wages at the ballot box, in our workplaces, in our communities, and in the streets.
SEIU President Mary Kay Henry. For Labor and for Democrats, the election results Tuesday were disastrous. Sweeping Republicans into office, the electorate also approved raises in state minimum wages that put more money into the pockets of 1.7 million workers. Henry says fearless fast food and Walmart workers pressing their fight for 15 made that possible.
They had the courage to stand up for a living wage and create momentum all across this country and made it possible for voters to endorse ballot initiatives. We believe that for families all across this country, a key takeaway is the progress that we made on the issue of raising wages for working families so that we can have an economy that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. And raising the minimum wage was a winning issue in red states, blue states, and purple states. The economy isn't working for regular people in any of these places. And the message from folks was that we have to increase wages and make it possible to work one job and create a decent life for our families.
The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, says it's reached a $2.75 million Fair Labor Standards Act settlement with the Army Corps of Engineers. The grievance was filed in 2009 and asserted that about 1,000 employees were illegally designated as being exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. That law governs overtime pay. LIUNA Local 29F filed the grievance against the Kansas City District Army Corps of Engineers. In addition to paying out the $2.75 million, the union victory means that going forward, employees will be covered by the overtime laws. LIUNA President Terry O'Sullivan called it a wonderful victory that recovers millions of dollars for hardworking employees. A report from United Kingdom members of Parliament documents human rights abuses against tobacco field workers in North Carolina. The report calls on British American Tobacco and Reynolds American to end the human rights abuses in their supply chains. The Farm Labor Organizing Committee's Justin Flores.
We're going to continue organizing on the ground, building our union and, publicizing what's going on and calling on these companies to do something to clean up their supply chain. It's really important that folks know about this campaign and what's going on there nationally so we can keep enough pressure on these companies and get them to do the right thing.
Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rise on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Kind of the same as we did yesterday, a recap of the day that was Tuesday, looking forward, what positives were highlighted Tuesday, what things we can take and move forward on, of which there were many, but also, kind of as I talked about all day yesterday, and lots of email response to the to the point. Democrats need to get a spine. They need to stand for something. And I can't tell you how many people emailed and said, I never thought about the wolf message, which was very direct, very, very, very straightforward. We're going to tax the drillers. We're going to invest in education. We're going to invest in our kids. We're going to invest in the future. We're going to do things differently, but we're going to do it together. And that was the message that, most people that I talked to, they got. And after you ask them about it. And this is something that I think Democrats really need to get their head around, need to take to heart, take Tuesday's beating and learn from it. Take the lessons that you learned and go, you know what? Running as half a Democrat and half a Republican, that doesn't really work. And, a number of folks were, going, wow, I couldn't believe that Harry Truman said that all the way back in the early 50s. Yeah. We're not Magellan. We're not discovering new territory. All of these paths have been hoed before. It's just that we're not learning those lessons yet. And if anything, Democrats need to dig their heels in more than ever and say, look, everything that's gone on, all of the troubles that we've had are because of failed right-wing Reagan-esque ideology. It is the exact same thing that Reagan, Bush the first, and Bush the second did that has put us in this mess. And if you remember back, and just to step back for a minute and remember the Bush years, it's interesting to me that the Bush legacy, of which at the time I was saying, look, all of these tax cuts and all of these handouts that we're getting, we're going to pay for in massive amounts. I can't tell you how many people said, well, George Bush gave me $500 back. I go, yeah, but how much is it going to cost you in the next 20 years? You got a $500 windfall. What'd you do with it? You got a $300 check. Twice Bush sent out checks. Twice. You want to talk about sugar daddy? There he was. Twice Bush sent out checks. And not only did he send out checks, he sent out letters saying, hey, I'm going to send you a check. So that every day you're running to the mailbox going, hey, when's my Bush prize coming? And you thought, hey, Bush is giving me money back. And he did. They took money from the Treasury that was supposed to be the surplus that he was given from Clinton, and he handed it out. And what we learned back in the 70s is that kind of handout, that doesn't generate new economic activity. It doesn't. We learned that. And we know it because what most people did was said, oh, well, I can pay my bills now. And it went into the general fund and it got paid out on car payments and mortgages and electric bills and food and whatever. There was no new consumption. We knew that. And I think they did too. I said at the time when it was going on that this is nothing but a political ploy, because had they really wanted to put more checks into people's pocket, they would have done it in the most efficient way possible, which is cut your payroll taxes. And then you would have had more money in your paycheck that you would have then gone and spent. And it would have been the most effective means of doing it, other than sending out a letter, which was good for the Postal Service. Because look, they needed the business, 180 million letters going out. That's fantastic. Little help for the post office. And then the checks, of course, that's another 180 million. And that's good, right? But how much did it cost to mail it? How much did it cost to print it? How much did it cost in the labor that went into it? It was the most inefficient way, the most poorly run way. If you did that as a business owner, you'd be out of business, which I think was part of the point, is waste as much as you can and make the biggest political statement. Because I go back to that era and all of the tax breaks that were handed out, the huge amounts of money. And all of this talk about the ownership society. How many people remember that? You remember the whole ownership society? We want people to own stuff. And the idea is that, people would buy houses and people would buy stocks and bonds, and we would all become the next Rockefellers. And we bought it because it's enticing. It's fairly sexy. Hey, I'm gonna be one of them. I'm gonna be that monopoly guy. Problem is, it wasn't. I remember Bush saying, you know, ownership in our society shouldn't be an exclusive club. He said, independence should not be a gated community. Everyone should be part of the American dream. And boy, that just oozes of Americana. It just chock full of, yeah. So in 2003, he, again, another tax cut, actually cut, he conned Congress into cutting tax rates on dividends by about 57%. So now you've got that capital gains rate, that top capital gains rate down to 15%. You know, so because, hey, you know, more people are going to buy stocks and they're going to invest. And I'm going, well, but wages, wages haven't been going up. In fact, they're going down right now. People don't have the money to invest in stocks and dividends and derivatives and all of that stuff. Even if it was zero tax, most average working people just don't have it. And, you know, they kept pushing that. You know, we're going to have a stake in the country. We're going to have skin in the game. Remember that? Remember all that? You know, more ownership. Yes. So what they did is they went and they pushed for easier mortgages. I know Carter gets a lot of blame for it, and Clinton gets a lot of blame for it. It was Bush who pushed to approve the zero down mortgage, or what the industry used to call liar loans, because you didn't have to put any documentation down. You know, just pay big fees. Don't have to worry about, did you really have a job? Could you really afford to pay for this? And, you know, then, of course, we know the banking industry bundled them up and sold them off, and basically the beginning of collapsing our economy. And you look at this and the reality is that ownership society, all of the things that he did, giving away the surplus, making it easier and causing this huge bubble, mind you, that inevitably collapsed this year. This year, home ownership has fallen to the lowest level since 1995. So you go, wait a second, that's a huge, huge step backwards, right? Because every year of the Bush's presidency, he was saying, you know, historic, you know, we've now reached new levels of home ownership. We now have more people's are owning homes. And the reality is that's not going to turn around anytime soon, because wages are in the tank. And, well, if you don't have a good job that pays decent wages, you can't necessarily buy a home. But you start looking at all the numbers, and all of the numbers point to mass consolidation at the top. In fact, David K. Johnston did a whole bunch of mashing up of numbers and coming around everything. And he came up with a number, a very big number, that because of Bush, because of those tax cuts, because of the $500 Bush prize and the $300 Bush prize and all of that, it cost every American taxpayer more than $48,000. It cost $6.6 trillion of income we working people never saw. And you just sit here and you scratch your head and go, but nothing. As we were saying all during the Bush years, these policies are pointed to consolidating wealth into the hands of the handful, not even the whole 1%, just a sliver of the 1%, the top 1/10 of 1%. Saw a much larger share of that capital gains, of that top money. And, you know, you sit back and you look at this stuff and you go, you know, the sad reality is we knew what was happening, and we did nothing. You look at those people who are making about $2 million a year. Their average dividends went from $246,000 when Bush took office to over $1.1 million today, a whopping 375% increase. And you go, well, how's that possible? Well, it's possible by a number of ways, because our tax code is skewed so heavily towards that 1/10 of 1%, the people who then use that money against us in the last election. And this idea that we need to give them more. We need to give them more, Rick, because they're the job creators, right? If we give them all this stuff, they'll create jobs. Well, you know, not surprisingly, they don't. And what's interesting to me is our incomes have continually fallen. And those folks who are moving money from one pocket to the other, they seem to be doing wildly well. Thank you very much. And the question that wasn't answered on Tuesday, that going forward Democrats have got to grab onto, is do we continue the failed ideology of the Bush-Reagan era? Do we do away with, as George H.W. Bush would have, of the supply side voodoo Reaganomics? Because we've tried it, it ain't working. In fact, what we need to be doing is what Tom Wolfe was talking about doing, raising taxes on the drillers and investing in the future, investing in roads and bridges and education and maybe broadband access across the country, investing in tomorrow. If we continue this austerity, cut, and punish, which is what I expect out of the Senate, we're going to continue to see this declining middle class until eventually it evaporates. So we can fight over nonsense when the sad reality is we're being robbed blind. And just in this time since the Bush presidency, from 2000 till today, we've lost over $48,000, every one of us. Think of how much you could have done with $48,000 over that period of time. Just a thought. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was me, you and me. As I was walking that ribbon highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was me, you and me. This land.
Welcome back to The World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service, reporting from Boston, Massachusetts. Businesses in Ebola-affected countries in West Africa received a small monetary boost today. The International Finance Corporation, a division of the World Bank, will contribute $450 million to the region, including $75 million to West African banks, intended to help them facilitate the import of critical goods. That stimulus will be critical, as the latest economic projections from the United Nations Development Program show that the ongoing Ebola outbreak is driving down tax and non-tax revenues and sapping exports from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Not far away, in the West African nation of Burkina Faso, UN mediators are being joined by the presidents of Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal to help negotiate a way out of the country's political crisis. Last week, Burkina Faso's longtime president, Blaise Compaoré, stepped down after massive street protests erupted ahead of his move to abolish term limits and seek office again next year. In the wake of Compaoré's departure, Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Yakuba Zida was appointed as a temporary leader by Burkina's military, a move that displeased many outside observers. The United Nations says a civilian-led transition government is needed immediately, and that continued stewardship by the military will continue to destabilize the country and the region. And in a dethroning of a less serious sort, Japan's Yamazaki Distillery has been named the maker of the world's best whiskey. According to the 2015 Whiskey Bible released by Jim Murray, Scottish offerings don't even crack the top 5. You'll have to pony up to get your hands on Yamazaki's single malt sherry cask from 2013. A limited number of bottles are still available online for about $150 each. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Laura Keeter. In the lead up to the midterm elections, Fox News figures hyped the idea that Republicans in Congress could impeach President Obama if he takes executive action on immigration. On Fox News' The Kelly File, host Megyn Kelly fearmongered about impeachment, asking what the president would have to do to get impeached.
How big would the action have to be? What would he have to do to make it an impeachable offense? That would so offend the Republicans, they would take the political perilous step of impeaching him.
Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace also speculated about impeachment.
I promise you, if he does that, if he by executive action goes against Congress and legalizes 4 million people who are in this country illegally, there is going to be a firestorm on Capitol Hill. You're going to see calls for impeachment. I don't mean that necessarily they'll do it, but there'll be calls for it. You're going to see lawsuits. There's going to be howling that he has overstepped his executive authority. It's going to be a big deal.
For more examples of conservative media figures calling for President Obama's impeachment and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen! God, I want you to be careful how you vote, y'all. Well, on every election day. Woo! Be careful how you vote on every election day.
Oh, yeah, we may end up, looking back like we are, what we did yesterday and again today. And I want to thank Patty for sending me that song. I like it. I wish we would have had it beforehand. It's kind of a forewarning, if you will. But, look, every once in a while, you need to get slapped upside the back of the head so you get right. And maybe this is an opportunity for Democrats to wake up and go, maybe we need to change the message just a little bit. And maybe it's a wake-up call for voters. Because, again, you look at the voting numbers, the number of folks who didn't show up, distressing to me on so many levels. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about the election and where we go from this point forward. I've asked Rick Bloomindale, president of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, to come talk with us. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, always a pleasure to be on the show.
So pretty much a thumping I would have, other than the governor's race, which was a resounding victory. Everything else seemed to go the other way.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We elected such a progressive guy, and a guy who pretty much told you, I know the press sort of fretted over the specifics, but, they always talk about they want somebody different. So now you get a guy who runs for office and won't make goofy promises like I won't raise taxes or I will raise taxes or this is exactly what I'm going to do. He's built a business by looking and see what works and what doesn't work. And I think it's refreshing that we had a candidate who laid out a broad progressive vision of middle-class tax cuts and tax those who can afford it a little bit more. And to say we need to tax the Marcellus shale, which all other states that have shale in their states or natural resources, they have a severance tax. We're the only state that doesn't, and we should have that. That's a reason, but he never said an amount. He said, but whatever he could get, he would use for education, and just laid out and talked about pretty much fairness and making an economy that works for everybody. And I think that's why there were so many angry voters out there who took their anger out on incumbents, and clearly money and gerrymandering played a role. But, there was some anger out there about career politicians. And one of the things that the Republican career politicians did was in races that, they won, they painted the Democrats as career politicians. And that was, I don't know that the Democratic folks who were guiding those campaigns did the same thing. So I think it was, the Republican Senate campaign committee and House campaign committees. And by the way, we supported a number of Republicans who ran for office who have been, pro-working families. But folks understood there's anger out there. A lot of voters don't know where to direct that anger.
Yeah.
And as a result, a lot of them didn't come out, right? Because they're frustrated with both parties. And so it's like, it was almost like they threw up their hands and they said, a plague on both your houses. So they didn't come out to vote. And unfortunately, those tend to be folks who vote for working family type candidates who get frustrated because they're trying to work two jobs. They're trying to just make ends meet. And if they really don't see somebody who's going to deliver, like in 2008, right, there was a lot of positive feeling that President Obama was going to be a game changer. Now, of course, he ran into the buzzsaw of legislative leaders who wanted him to fail. And, there's only so much you can do through executive action. And he tried to work with Congress, and, they just blocked him at every step of the way. Now that they're in charge, I'd like to see, if they can build their agenda, if they have an agenda, because as our brothers and sisters in the building trades always tell me, it's always easier to tear something down than to build something up.
Absolutely.
So let's see if we're going to be able to build something. And the same goes here in Pennsylvania. Now, I think our leaders here are different, both the Republicans and the Democrats. I think they actually understand that government has a vital role to play in education, infrastructure, those kind of things. And so I think we're going to see some cooperation. And again, because, Tom Wolf did not run against the legislature. He ran on a proactive agenda. And, he didn't want to run a negative campaign. He ended up running some negative ads. But, and all Corbett did was run negative ads, never talked about his record.
Well, if you don't have one, if all you have is a crummy record, you got to run away from it, not toward it.
Exactly. You got to run away from the education cuts. You had to run away. The transportation deal, even though it's good and provided lots of jobs, if he admitted to having done that, he'd have to admit to breaking his no tax pledge. But so he ran on nothing except attacking Tom Wolf, which is the reason instead of winning with 15 or 20 points, which the polls had him, even 3 weeks ago. As much as voters say they hate negative ads, they respond to negative ads. Yeah. And I think that's why Tom Wolf won. Now, winning by 10 points, don't get me wrong, that's a significant victory.
Especially against an incumbent.
It's the only guy to ever beat a Senate incumbent for governor's race. So it is an impressive victory. But Corbett just hammered and hammered and hammered away about things that weren't true. But, the thing about political advertising, there is no truth in advertising law because it's protected by the First Amendment.
Right.
So unless the press calls him out on his lies, he can say anything he wants. And he did. Like that bullshit, BS. Sorry, I almost slipped up. God, I was on the radio.
I got the button.
Almost that loony report from the Commonwealth Foundation that said that Wolf's plan, which according to the press, nobody ever saw. So somehow the Commonwealth Foundation had some kind of mystical crystal ball, said that Tom Wolf was going to raise your taxes by 188%. Now, since Tom Wolf never said one word about what his tax plan would look like, I don't know where they got that number. I do know. They made it up.
They pulled it out of the backside. Of course they did.
Yeah, that's right. They just made it up, and, Corbett trumpeted it, and, some people got a little worried. So,
but I look at this election and I look at the race, and the one thing that sticks out in the people that I've spoken to, the message was very clear. We're going to tax the drillers. We're going to invest in education. That was a very clear message. And as you pointed out, he had the talk of good government. We're going to make your lives better. And this is something I've been saying for a long time that the Democrats need to take back and not shy away from. Yesterday I talked a little bit about Harry Truman, and one of the famous quote that attributed to him: if you give the voters a choice between a genuine Republican and a Democrat who acts like a Republican, they're going to go after the genuine article. They're not going to jump on the halfway fence, and that's what I think a lot of Democrats tried to do. They tried to run away from democratic principles.
Didn't even talk about them, and certainly minimum wage wasn't a big issue in our campaign, in the Democratic candidates' campaigns or the Republican candidates' campaign. But in every state that it was on the ballot, it passed with an overwhelming majority. And, you know, you had a Senate candidate in Arkansas, to your point, who didn't vote for the minimum wage increase. He was strategically absent, I think was the word. He shied away from it during the campaign, and he tried to be Republican light. And as a result, he's no longer a U.S. senator. So you're either for something, and, you know, people agree with helping. They are workers, right?
Yep.
They want to have a little bit of level playing field. So, you know, and even the Tea Party folks, they're a lot of them are blue collar workers who are just angry at the unfairness of the economic system. And unfortunately, through the mass media, they've convinced them to be mad at the wrong folks, to be mad at labor unions who actually, if they joined one, they would have a better wage, they'd have pension, they'd have health care. But instead, they say, well, we'll rely on Wall Street to give us a raise. Well, Wall Street's never going to give anybody a raise. They want it all to go to the shareholders. And most of these Tea Party folks, they're not shareholders. They're average working folks who are just trying to get ahead, and they're angry, but their anger's been misdirected, I think, at the wrong folks. It's the folks who want to hurt them, not help them.
I agree, and this is where I think Democrats need to figure out what the message is and stick to it. You know, we're going to make working people's lives better. We're going to increase the minimum wage. We're going to make sure that people get paid sick days, so if they get sick, they don't have to go to work sick. We're going to help students by maybe letting them restructure their student loan debt, maybe even take it away. Do something along those lines, since we've saddled this generation of students with massive debt. That should be where the party is. We're going to make people's lives better, not just the 1%, but everybody.
Right, and you know, and that you hit the nail right. You hit a bunch of nails right on the head. I don't know if you were ever a carpenter. I know you were a teamster, but you did a good job with hitting the nails on the head. But you know, I was debating with one of the chamber people one time, and they talked about the fact that, you know, most people making the minimum wage are living at home and in households where folks have over 80 or 100,000. Well, there's no question that my kids aren't doing as well as I was at their age, right? Because wages have been stagnant.
Right.
But the fact is, if you have student debt, then of course you're going to live at your parents' house, because $800 a month is what you would be normally as a young person, going out, getting your first apartment, maybe even getting a mortgage on a house in town, and giving into the economy. Instead, you're just paying a bank back who just, gives that money to shareholders. That money doesn't go back into the economy. If I'm paying rent to a local landlord, that landlord is putting that money right back into a fresh coat of paint, fixing the plumbing, taking care of the exterior, whatever, the landlords do. But instead, we got students living at home, paying money to banks to repay college loans, and barely making enough to get out and live on their own. I mean, maybe not minimum wage, but it might be $10 or $11 or $12 an hour, which, when you calculate that out, right, that sounds like a lot, but it really, if you have an $800 loan, you have tried to do rent, tried to do food, have a car to get to work, you have insurance, then you got no money for anything else.
I got to tell you, Rick, $10 an hour doesn't sound like a lot to me. I talk about this often. Back in the mid '80s, throwing boxes on a shipping dock in Cleveland, I was making $15 an hour with full health care, with a pension, with paid sick days, vacation, all of that stuff. That was more than 25 years ago. $10 an hour to me just doesn't seem that much today. But the sad reality is that very job I did back then, as a casual making $15 an hour, they're only paying $11.50 for today, 25, 28 years later.
Right. And where's the rest of that money going? It didn't go to China, right? You can't load boxes in Cleveland in China. That money went to the shareholders instead of the workers.
So let me ask you.
That's where unions make a difference.
Absolutely. And I say that all the time. Last line of questioning I've got for you. So since the looks like a landslide victory, you got 30 Republican senators and an overwhelming majority in the House. What's the next month look like Does the leadership on the Republican side feel emboldened to maybe move some of the ugliness that they couldn't get past the last 3 years?
I don't. They might, but I haven't seen any indication that they're. First of all, those new people, they don't take office till January. So right now we're dealing with the same. So when we beat back paycheck deception, it was 28 no votes to 20 yes votes. So those are the same people that are going to be voting in the lame duck session. Those 40, 23 Ds and 27 Republicans. So when January rolls around and you have the 30-20, same goes for the House, 92 Ds, 111 Republicans. So we should be okay through the lame duck. There's not the kind of anger out there that was in Michigan when a bunch of people lost. It's just that anger is not out there. So I don't know that the leadership, they don't have the votes yet. Next year, I think Tom Wolf he's already said, I'm going to reach out to the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership, and we're going to try to work together. So I'm hoping that they're wanting to punish workers agenda goes to an agenda of creating real good paying jobs, dealing with poverty. Some of the leaders from the Republican side have shown a real interest in combating poverty and some of this wage inequality. We've got some good people on both sides of the aisle in Pennsylvania. And I think cooler heads, of course, we have the extremists, but I think cooler heads are going to, again, as I said, Pennsylvania, we have leaders of both parties who understand that government has to be involved. Now, to what extent, that's always the debate, but it's not like Washington where you have people who don't think government should do anything, including helping people out in floods and hurricanes and, all those kind of things. In Pennsylvania, we still have members of both parties who believe that government should be a vital part of education, making sure that schools have the money, that government has a role to play in infrastructure so that our businesses can deliver their goods to market. So I think we're going to have and now it's going to be tough, right? Everybody's going to be tough negotiators. The Republicans certainly have their views of how, where that money should be spent. Certainly the Democrats and Governor Wolf have their views. The business community has their views. The labor movement has theirs. But hopefully we can agree on some things to move Pennsylvania forward. Right to work, paycheck deception, none of those things do anything to bring jobs to a state. All you have to do is look at Oklahoma, Indiana, and Michigan, where, you've seen some declines. In Wisconsin is, low in the job creation market.
Still not as bad as Pennsylvania. Still not as bad as PA.
Right.
Last.
Yeah, 50th. That's right. We got to turn that around, and those jobs need to be good paying jobs so people can, join the middle class and feel like they've moved forward some. So. We got our work cut out for us, but I think Tom Wolf and the leaders in both houses, both parties, are going to try to move Pennsylvania forward. And I'm looking forward to a much more, a better time for workers in Pennsylvania, because I think we're all going to try to work together to make people's lives better, because that's what we're here for.
There you go. That's what I'm hoping for as well. Rick, always great talk with you. Appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Rick Bloomindale, president of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. Where working people come to talk.
I'll help you in every way he can. But when he takes the seat, just the other way. Be careful how you vote on every election day.
For many, the 8-hour day is the standard, but it wasn't always this way. The original American workday was from sunup to sundown, following the demands of an agricultural workday. Over time, the nation became more industrialized and workers moved from individually owned, self-sufficient farms to factories, taking workers from their homes and families. Factory owners demanded the agricultural sunup to sundown workday, forcing workers to toil long hours in grueling conditions. Workers began to collectively organize in pursuit of more time for family, education, and recreation. The cry of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will grew louder. For a century, the 8-hour day was viewed as the holy grail of the labor movement, and for this hallowed vision, workers sacrificed, often with their blood and their lives. The first strike for shorter hours occurred in May of 1791 in the city of Philadelphia, where carpenters protested a day's wages, paying the same in January as was paid for a longer day in July. Chicago in 1886 was home to one of the largest showings of solidarity. Some 80,000 workers turned out to support the 8-hour cause. It was in Chicago's Haymarket Square that a terrorist bomb and the blazing guns of company-paid police cost policemen and numerous workers their lives and their blood. As a result of the Haymarket tragedy, 8 innocent men were tried and convicted for a crime they did not commit. 4 of the men were hung. The Haymarket Square tragedy was but one of many battles in which working men, women, and children shed blood, tears, and flesh in the pursuit of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
In the U.S. alone, the cosmetics industry pulls in some $70 billion a year in sales of what's commonly called makeup. But lipstick, etc., are not the only kind of makeup the cosmetic giants are peddling. For years, their lobbyists, lawyers, and PR agents have been making up facts, stories, half-truths, and whole lies to keep lawmakers and regulators from banning various cancer-causing, hormone-disrupting ingredients that their products contain. One especially nasty example of this is the continuing campaign by L'Oreal, Revlon, and the industry's Personal Care Products Council to keep putting formaldehyde in everything from baby wipes to hair straighteners. Back in 1981, the National Toxicology Program, an interagency scientific panel, first listed this noxious chemical as a likely human carcinogen. Cosmetic makers erupted with a volcano of outrage, and the NTP findings were buried. But the toxicologists, pushed by consumer and environmental groups, kept doing even deeper research. And in 2011, NTP listed formaldehyde as, quote, known to be a human carcinogen. That should have been that. But corporate lobbyists got their congressional puppets to assail NTP for flawed research and for interfering in private business. However, the prestigious National Academy of Science has been reviewing that research and has now unequivocally endorsed NTP's findings, even adding that the new research shows that formaldehyde may cause a much wider array of cancers than previously known. This is Jim Hightower saying, so after 33 years, the health of babies finally wins one over cosmetic profiteers, right? Not quite yet. Incredibly, Revlon and L'Oreal continue to balk at necessary reforms. To keep up and join the fight, go to www.ewg.org.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. During the break, a couple of emails pointing out it was refreshing, Janice says, to see a candidate run on a good government platform, that government can make people's lives better. And I agree, Janice. It's one of the things that I gave Wolf credit for, and the very direct message of we're going to tax the drillers and we're going to invest. This idea that austerity and cut, gut, and punish has failed us, and that we now need to be investing in the future and taking calculated risks as you would do in any business. I mean, that's the thing I love about the right wing. They talk about we're going to run like a business, and then they starve the beast. And you go, wait a minute. I don't know any business that grows by starving itself to death, by not advertising, by not investing in their product and in new material and all. I have a friend who works for the Department of Treasury. Tells me that they wanted to do one of those webinar things. And that the company that they had contracted with to do a webinar said that they couldn't hook up their system to the state's system because, well, the state system is like the great grandfather of computers, and they don't interact because it's that badly outdated. And, if you don't run a business by not upgrading your equipment, it's just very simple. Anyway, no matter what you think of Tuesday, I still give credit to the people who put their name on the ballot, stepped forward and said, I'll be the one that to take the beating, if you will, which is why I give my friend Jake Long such enormous credit for being that guy, not only to step forward, but also to step forward at a time when he really wasn't all that ready for it. But I think he did a fantastic job, which is why I've asked him to come on the program, talk with us. Jake, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks. I listened to your intro, and the irony is you talked about Marcellus Shale. I agreed, and that was one of my platforms. I agreed with the governor. I'd like to say I had the idea. I really didn't, but I agree with him 100% to take that Marcellus Shale and dollar for dollar give it to education. But there were also some other proposals out there. I think Senator Utachik had a good proposal, which I liked. Paying down the retirement debt, using some of the income from Marcellus Shale to pay off a state bond, which he says could generate about $9 billion. And that could have perhaps kept some reactionaries in the legislature from taking away defined benefit retirements. My point is there's no free lunch, and you're exactly right. This nonsense that somehow you're a tax and spender if you ask the natural gas industry to pay a fair tax is ridiculous. And you see what's going on in this state right now. We've got some real problems because of that philosophy, but you're exactly right. But to get to my campaign, I'd like to thank all those who helped. I had a tremendous amount of support from the labor movement, but I also had a tremendous amount of support from friends in the community. When you run for public office, they tell you, you need a big ego, but I'll tell you this, after going through it, you realize quickly that you have to have a lot of help and a lot of friends to wage a successful campaign. And the truth is, we thought going into election day, we had a handle on the numbers, Rick, and there were some extenuating circumstances. The power structure in the Republican Party in my area just went crazy with negative flyers and mailings. They sent out 4 or 5 against me. They accused me of being best buds with the president. They accused me of being a union goon because I got arrested in 1988 on the picket line, if you can imagine. That's a summary offense, which is the equivalent on the legal barometer. It's the equivalent of a parking ticket, but yet they sent out mailings that, we can't have these criminals holding public office. That's how ugly it got. And there was a lot of reaction from a good number of citizens in this locality. There was actually a sympathy vote for my opponent, and the Republicans really got their people out. Not only did he have a sympathy vote because of the outrageous conduct of the Republican Party who were backing the independent, I understand that the Corbett campaign made a concerted effort in Republican counties like Lebanon County, and they made a massive amount of phone calls and really pumped up the Republican turnout. And because of that, we got overwhelmed with the numbers. but we really felt that going into Election Day, we really had a legitimate shot.
Yeah, well, that makes one of us, because when I look at the districts, and it's nothing against your campaign or what you guys were able to accomplish, which I think was Herculean in what you guys had done. I just think that the way that the districts are drawn, the composition of the districts. In fact, when you've got elected leaders picking their voters instead of voters picking their leaders, I have a problem with that. And your district, like mine, very, very bizarre looking on the map.
Absolutely. Well, two comments, Rick. First of all, we had some very unique and inherent advantages. There were 4 candidates, and your listeners are going to say, how's that possible? Well, we had the Republican, Russ Diamond, and then we had a man by the name of McIntyre who was an independent, but was really backed by the Republican establishment, if you can believe that. And then we had another candidate who I defeated by 5-1 when she decided that she was going to run as a write-in candidate as a Democrat when she failed to get on the Republican ballot. Now, she did very well in the primary. She got 45%. This time, Diamond got over 7,000, and she didn't even get 1,000. My point is that if she would have come in even close to what she got in the primary, I could very well be the representative in the 102nd. But unfortunately, that didn't hold sway. But you're right about gerrymandering. I'm the only candidate of the 4 calling for redistricting reform, and that's not going to be easy. It's going to take a constitutional amendment, but it is a good government thing that if we're really serious, it's systemic. I mean, some of these districts, you literally can't lose. That's why you have people up there for 30, 35 years, Rick, and I'm not so sure that's good for representative democracy.
Well, I'm in the mindset we should be drawing districts based on competition. Sure, compact and contiguous, but also that they're competitive, because I think that is good for participatory democracy, for people to get involved in campaigns, much like you did, and the people that you brought into the process. And to me, I think that's good, where you have vigorous debate. When I saw Sue Helm say that there's nothing in it for her to debate Gene Stilp, right there, every voter should have said, well, we're not voting for you. But she didn't have to, because the district was so badly rigged against any opponent.
You're absolutely right, and there's no excuse other than the political class protecting their own. I mean, let's be honest. The redistricting process has become an incumbent protection racket, let's be honest. I mean, we need, other states did it. I mean, California is the classic example. People criticize, they call it the left coast, but guess what? When it comes to redistricting, they do it right. They set up an independent commission and they make it competitive. Make the candidates do what I did. Go out and compete in the marketplace of ideas. Talk to the people. Tell them what your ideas are. Make every election a contest, a fair election based on the numbers that you set up in a fair and equitable manner. And I guarantee you, you're going to have a better representative government. You're going to have a better democracy.
And I think at some point we would be able to get rid of these failed ideologies like trickle-down economics that people genuinely get on a visceral level that doesn't work. It's not going to work, but yet the moneyed interest, the entrenched interest, keep ramming that down our throat. Like if we just try it one more time and just a little bit more, somehow magically it's going to happen. It's not. And I think most voters get that. Problem is, we've got this team sport mentality also that has been thrown on us by the big moneyed interest, splitting people. To me, I think if you get into that room and you start having those debates, I think things only get better for the working class of this country, which is why I fear it's never going to happen.
Well, and I think we have to, when you talk about the whole system, you have to talk about Citizens United. I mean, yes, that massive amount of money is going into the federal elections, but it seeps down to the states. And the big money doesn't want change. They want the status quo. They want to have leverage in every facet of the government, and it's not going to be easy. Reform is going to be facing some powerful interests. But it's like I told a lot of people, and a lot of people were I had to persuade people to even vote. I mean, they were so turned off on government, both at the state level and the federal level, And I told him we have two choices. We can give up on the system, and by giving up on the system, we're giving up on the future and the future for your children, or we can roll up our sleeves and try to effectuate change. It's not going to be easy, but great change starts with great ideas.
I'm right there with you. And the sad reality is what you said, that most people just seem to throw up their hands. That is a major mission accomplished moment for the right wing of this country, for the corporatists, for the Wall Street types. This is the break out the Bush banner, break out the sock for the drawers, the whole 9 yards. That's exactly what they want. They want us to turn our heads in pain and run screaming away, because then they control everything.
Well, the one thing I think we need to put things in perspective, I mean, it wasn't a good election in terms of enhancing democracy, but these things, you've been around long enough, I've been around long enough to know that it goes in waves.
Yep.
And this was a bad year. Hopefully 2016 will be a better year. Hopefully we'll have a good president. And hopefully we can start changing this country around for the better. I mean, we don't have much of a choice. I mean, if we're going to fight for a better government, we're going to fight for all the working people in this country. We're going to have to hang in there and just, get to work, roll up our sleeves, and fight for a better future for our children.
So let me ask you the big question. You're looking at 2016?
Rick, I'm laughing because about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes after the polls closed, they just got the results and they throw a mic in your face and they wanted to know what my plans were. And I told the local radio station my plans are to go home and sleep, get a good night's sleep, and relax a little bit, and then we'll think about it. That's a long way off. I'm not writing it off, but I'd have to think about it. I've learned some valuable lessons. I do think I'd be a wiser candidate the second time around. I think we made some mistakes that hopefully we learned our lesson, but I'm not writing it off. This has been very, very difficult. I've been around for 30 years, and now I know why more people don't run. It is extremely difficult, but I think in many ways I found that I have what it takes to be a good candidate. But I'd have to think about it. It takes total dedication. The thing next time, if I would run, I would have 2 years to plan. This was kind of forced on me right after, literally within 10 days of the primary. But I've learned, especially in the Republican area, Rick, you got to plan several years ahead. And I'm not precluding it, but if I do run, we're going to have to do things a little bit differently.
Well, as I've told people who have sought my counsel on this in the past, if you're going to run once, you got to run 3 times. It's got to be the first time you learn what it is you didn't know. You make all the mistakes and you learn. You get hit with that 2x4 a couple of times and you know not to do it. The second time you hone the message, you hone things. And then the third time, if you don't win, you probably should give it up. But it's that process.
Marriages. A little bit like marriages, huh, Rick? If you have 3 divorces, I guess you're just not made for marriage.
Me, I've been divorced once.
No, I wasn't talking about you. I'm just talking, making a comparison.
Oh, your opponent. That's right. He was divorced 3 times.
4.
4. Wow. Also 3 protection from abuse orders. The whole video of all cops are pigs and liars. That's the guy that's sitting in the going to be sitting in the General Assembly. Thrilled I am.
Well, it is what it is.
Well, Jake, like I said, when we talked about this, right when you were considering doing it, I have nothing but good things to say for you, and nothing but the utmost respect for your willingness to step forward, and thank you, and I wish you the best, man.
All right, thanks, Rick. You've been a real friend. Thanks.
Thanks so much, our good friend Jake Long. No, I mean, understand it's a tough gig. Once you throw your name into that hat, everything you've ever done then comes under the microscope, which is kind of why my wife says, no, I don't think so. You can't do it, because she doesn't want to know everything I've done throughout my life, which, when you're in that fishbowl, it has a way of rearing its ugly head. Anyway, I got to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Trees are green, red roses too. clear blue for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Working people will keep fighting for higher wages at the ballot box, in our workplaces, in our communities, and in the streets.
SEIU President Mary Kay Henry. For Labor and for Democrats, the election results Tuesday were disastrous. But while sweeping Republicans into office, the electorate also approved raises in state minimum wages that put more money into the pockets of 1.7 million workers. Henry says fearless fast food and Walmart workers pressing their fight for 15 made that possible.
They had the courage to stand up for a living wage and create momentum all across this country, and made it possible for voters to endorse ballot initiatives. We believe that for families all across this country, a key takeaway is the progress that we made on the issue of raising wages for working families so that we can have an economy that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. And raising the minimum wage was a winning issue in red states, blue states, and purple states. The economy isn't working for regular people in any of these places. And the message from folks was that we have to increase wages and make it possible to work one job and create a decent life for our families.
The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, says it's reached a $2.75 million Fair Labor Standards Act settlement with the Army Corps of Engineers. The grievance was filed in 2009 and asserted that about 1,000 employees were illegally designated as being exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. That law governs overtime pay. LIUNA Local 29F filed the grievance against the Kansas City District Army Corps of Engineers. In addition to paying out the $2.75 million, the union victory means that going forward, employees will be covered by the overtime laws. LIUNA President Terry O'Sullivan called it a wonderful victory that recovers millions of dollars for hardworking employees. A report from United Kingdom members of Parliament documents human rights abuses against tobacco field workers in North Carolina. The report calls on British American Tobacco and Reynolds American to end the human rights abuses in their supply chains. The Farm Labor Organizing Committee's Justin Flores.
We're going to continue organizing on the ground, building our union and, publicizing what's going on and calling on these companies to do something to clean up their supply chain. It's really important that folks know about this campaign and what's going on there nationally so we can keep enough pressure on these companies and get them to do the right thing.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations for nearly a century. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. As we've been talking about, I think some of the takeaways from Tuesday's election, again, back to the Harry Truman quote. If you're going to give voters the choice between a Republican and a Democrat in Republican clothing, obviously they're going to choose the genuine article. And I think it comes back to messaging and talking about those working class issues that poll very popular. And we know this, and it's one of those things that I think we get on a visceral level, but I think the Democrats have this, we're smarter than the polling, or we're smarter than anyone else, and then run these really just bad campaigns. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about Tuesday and the messaging that we should be using going forward. I've asked Robert Kramer. He is a partner at the Democracy Partners. He's also a general counsel for Americans United for Change. Robert, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, good to be with you.
So I look at Tuesday as one of these moments where I kept seeing all of these these senators and all of these campaigns running against Obamacare, running against the basic democratic principles. I even saw one guy saying, "Yeah, we should cut back on Social Security." Seems dumb to me, but it's kind of what the party did.
Well, I don't want to go overboard here. I mean, it was a tough environment, and this was, by the way, just to be clear, this was the toughest Senate map confronted by any president since John Kennedy. I mean, of the 24 states that voted against President Obama, 80% had elections this last Tuesday. So it was a tough environment. It is absolutely true that if you're on the defensive, you're losing, and that some of the candidates tended to at least what people heard was, "I'm sorry, don't be mad," and that ain't a winning message. Now, I think there was a consensus on the part of the Democratic leadership that the strong populist messages are what worked. Getting everybody to do that all the time was a problem. We've got the issue in these midterm elections fundamentally, and there are a couple of key factors that we got to deal with. I think, Rick. I mean, the
turnout being the biggest one, obviously. I mean, here in Pennsylvania, we had a landslide victory for Tom Wolf, which was fantastic because he ran on the message of, "I'm going to tax the drillers and I'm going to invest in our future." That was very popular with people. Also, the good government argument that government should make people's lives better. But here's the thing: 500,000 less people voted this midterm than the last midterm, which to me says we didn't really have a voting populace that was all that engaged.
Absolutely. One of the top priority in these off-year elections is mobilizing our electorate. And that requires, it seems to me, that we have year-round methods of engagement. We're not just coming to people at the end and saying, let's get out. And that we have inspirational thematics. Mechanics by themselves won't do the trick, right? I mean, we got to be talking to people in a way that empowers them, because a lot of the people who we count on, the fundamental difference between them and a lot of the ones who vote all the time at the Republican end are they feel less empowered in life in general. So their attitude is, what is this election? Help me. We got to connect the dots in a very concrete way, and the best way to do that is by engaging people all the time. And I think that's a critical thing.
Absolutely. It's what I tell my labor friends all the time. Labor ramps up about 3 months before an election. They get this great mobilization effort out there, and then the day after the election, they go home. And then we don't see them until the next election. Or I've been saying, well, you need to have that constant year-round kind of engagement and that constant year-round kind of campaign mentality that I think the right wing has done masterfully.
I couldn't agree more. Now, there is another thing that I think we just got to put our hands on. And it's not just that the midterms, it's not just Democrats who do poorly in the second midterm of a presidency.
Right.
We took back the Senate, the House in 2006 in a comparable context.
Correct.
The Bush administration. And there was one exception, and that was 1998 when Clinton we actually made ground.
Well, the economy was smoking along then.
And that's the bottom line. In the end, people measure performance of a president or of a party by if they deliver for them in their personal lives, and they measure that by their income. And for the last 25 years, I don't have to tell you, Rick, all of the income increases, and there have been considerable ones, 80% increases in gross domestic product per capita in the last 30 years. You'd think we'd all be 80% better off, but it all went to the top 2%, almost all of it. So everybody's income is stagnant, and people, as a consequence, are unhappy people. When they're unhappy people, they think that let's try somebody else.
Yeah, but here's the thing that gets me, Robert. You would think that unhappy people, we've been basically doing the same economic ideology for the last 35 years. From the Reagan years forward, it's always been, we're going to slash programs. We're not going to invest in infrastructure. We're not going to invest in the future. We're going to cut, tax cuts galore. And as you pointed out, more for the wealthy because they're the job creators. Somehow their pockets will fill, their table will overflow, and we can fight over the crumbs that hit the ground. Problem is, there are never any crumbs on the ground.
Exactly. No, that's right. Exactly. The rules are rigged so that they can siphon off money. All the new increases for the economy go to that small number of people. We have to focus on that as like a laser, both fighting for it. That's why these populist messages are so important, and actually doing it. I mean, we've got to do whatever is necessary when we're in power to increase the incomes of average people. That should be our total fundamental mission. And if that happens, like you said, 98, we had Clinton in this scandal and all this stuff. Didn't matter to people. Nope. Their incomes were going up. Yeah. And so we won. I mean, I think that's just a fundamental lesson we got to focus on. And there's a limit to what you can do. It's important to be saying, hey, look, here are the things we've done to improve the economy. But people in their personal lives figure out what's going on in the economy for them.
Yep. Well, the old Ronald Reagan question. The old Ronald Reagan question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And sadly, for the vast majority of people, while the unemployment rate is down, while it looks like we're creating jobs every month, the average everyday working stiff, people like me and our listeners, we're struggling. And you hear that time and time again.
Time and time again. It isn't that the President Obama or the Democratic leadership is not trying. Part of the issue is, of course, the other side does a great job trying to prevent us from doing things like raising the minimum wage and equal pay and all the things that will actually make that happen. But we really gotta focus like crazy on that as the principal focus, and either deliver it or be fighting for it like our lives depended on it out there every day.
Let's talk about the minimum wage. Let's talk about the minimum wage for a second.
Sure.
Because a lot of people are saying, well, that should have been a main campaign issue. And look, I think it should have been a much greater campaign issue. But I think for most working people that I know, they've been sold this message. And I know polling wise, an increase in the minimum wage always polls pretty well.
Very popular. Yeah.
But for most average working day people, they're looking at it, go, well, I've been told if we increase, let's say, the fast food workers' wages up to $10 or to $15 an hour, it's just going to make my cost of a cheeseburger go up, and it's going to make my standard of living go down because we haven't connected the dots that it's going to make their lives better too.
Well, that's true. That is partially true, but I think you'll find the good news, I think, is generally most ordinary Americans understand that you shouldn't work full-time to live in poverty. Most ordinary Americans actually do understand that if you put more money in people's pockets, they can turn around and buy product and make the economy grow. I think I think we just got to be firm and proud. We want a high wage economy, and if we're battling for that in a very clear, self-conscious way, I think that'll help us enormously. But we got to understand that in a context where people are not feeling so good, they're going to look for the other side. They're going to say, "Switch horses if this horse ain't working." Yeah. And that's a key priority. The other thing is. And there's a limited amount we can do about this in the short term. This Citizens United thing has allowed, it's not just that it allows a lot of money on the other side from a bunch of plutocrats. It's also that it intensifies the negativity of campaigns kind of necessarily. There's a constraint on individual candidates to do negative messaging because it reflects on them. That's not true of these outside groups, right? So, and they do it, and we can't be on the defense, so we got to do it. And all this negative stuff tends to make people feel, the hell with all this stuff. I'm just not going to be involved. And that's a problem, as well.
Well, as I, just in the last segment, in the last hour, I talked to a guy who ran a local state house seat here in Pennsylvania, and he said, a lot of the people he talked to, they were just, I don't want to know nothing. I just leave me alone. Just not wanting to be engaged because they're tired of that kind of negativity. And I say that's mission accomplished for the 1%, mission accomplished for the conservatives to turn the vast majority of working people away so that, control much easier.
That's exactly right, because their voters have a higher propensity to vote because they're wealthier and feel more in control of their lives. That's exactly right. So if they discourage people as a whole, they end up coming out ahead. And the other lesson I think from this election is, when I was a kid, I lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, and it snowed. When it snows in Shreveport, Louisiana, everything shuts down.
Right.
So I was in high school. It snowed. Me and my buddy went to New Orleans on a train. Walking down Bourbon Street was one of my great lessons in life at 16. This big hawker at the strip joint puts his arm around me and says, "Come on in, Sonny. They're going to say you did anyway." Our Democrats, everybody's got to understand, if you moderate your positions on things that are true values to you, it's not going to help. They're going to say you did this stuff anyway. They're going to say you're Barack Obama anyway. So I understand you got to differentiate yourself in some of these states where he wasn't popular, but you got to stand up proudly, or people say, well, your message is, like, I'm sorry, don't be mad.
Well, let me ask you the other side of this then, because, yesterday I talked with someone who said, look, the sad reality is a good number of the Democratic candidates, they don't know what it's like to be average, everyday, work a day, Joe six-pack. They don't know what that life's like. They can't identify, so you can't really hold them responsible for not being able to identify with what average, everyday working people go through. Could that be a part of the problem as well? Because you're saying that you want people to have firmly held beliefs. Well, if they don't understand it, how can they believe it?
Well, that's true to some extent. We certainly need more average folks running for office, folks who have had real jobs and make things and don't just push paper, and most importantly, don't just be speculators for a living, kind of professional gamblers. But I do think that's true. I do think, by the way, in general, we have a lot of committed candidates who run for office and who are elected. I'm a little biased. My wife is Jan Schakowsky, who's a member of Congress.
Who we've had on the program. We've had on the program a number of times.
Right. But I know a lot of them. And I know a lot of those people who ran this time who are really committed and lost. And it's not, it's important for us not to form a little circular firing squad and say, well, we just don't do it as well. In the last 2 years ago, we kicked their ass, and that's in a different electorate. Our real problem, as you point out at the top of this discussion, is we have to make sure the electorate reflects America. When it does, we win.
Yeah, one of the things, Robert, that I thought the Democrats should have really grabbed onto early was helping the next generation that we've screwed so badly with the student loan debt. That's one of those things that, my generation, I'm 47, I didn't get saddled with that massive amount of debt. Had some coming out of college, but not the kind that we're seeing kids with today who they can't move out of their parents' basement because they've got this massive debt on their back. To me, that's another one of those winning issues that would have brought the younger people out to vote, at least I think.
Huge winning issue. And one, by the way, that was part of, all the attempts that were made to do Democratic messaging. I got to tell you, the other thing, Rick, is, we did, and this is not altogether unintentional. Well, put it another way. We ran into some things that caused the news media to focus on, Ebola, ISIL, and the other side, quite intentionally, irresponsibly whipped up fear, because fear played in their, it played for them,
But don't you think that the Democrat, if I were Obama, I would have handled the whole situation differently? That would have been a moment for me to call the Senate back and say, confirm my Surgeon General. We need him right now.
Well, that's an option. I do think, and by the way, that's going to be a battle right now. It's going to come right up next week, the Surgeon General thing. And I think you'll find the administration and a lot of organizations go really hard for trying to get him approved. But it's, I think it's really important to, not, I don't want to blame our folks primarily. The other side, this was a very tough playing ground.
Right.
And there are a bunch of lessons we can learn. And the top among them has to do with turnout. But the other one, this thing about why people really vote, and particularly second midterms and about their incomes. That's just in the first midterm, people were unhappy because the president had not yet cleaned up the mess that George Bush left, right? I mean, and a lot of the problem with this administration that it's faced is...
We're still mopping it up.
It's still mopping up both an economic and the foreign policy disasters left us by Bush. And the Republicans sit on the sidelines and complain. It's like the arsonist complaining that the fireman's not putting the fire out quick enough, and that's a problem. And we'll, I think, historically look back and do that. I do think, I will say this, though, that as Paul Krugman said, in the end, people will look back on the Obama presidency and say, this was a very consequential presidency. The healthcare law, I mean, a lot of us would have liked the public option and all sorts of single payer, but the healthcare law is major change. The regulation of Wall Street, not as good as it could be, but boy, a hell of a lot better than it was. I mean, the equal pay. I mean, a lot of the stuff the president's doing, I think he's going to make a strong decision about immigration, which I think is very important in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. And Mitch McConnell says that's like waving a red flag in front of the Senate Republicans. The only thing they would take is a white flag. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They do business for a white flag. Thank you very much. I'll surrender and do whatever you want. Bull.
And that's where I keep saying the Democrats need to gain that spine and not give in on Social Security and not give in on a number of fronts. And that's why I think the active, engaged electorate, labor not going away, hopefully, we can push for some of those things. But Robert,
well, and I got to tell you this. I mean, it's a plug for my old book about 6-7 years ago. The name of that book was "Listen to Your Mother, Stand Up Straight: How Progressives Can Win." There
you go. How much easier can you put that? That's a great image. I appreciate that. But Robert Kramer, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Good to talk to you, brother.
Love to have you back again at some point in the future.
Anytime, and thank you for being out there and standing up for progressives in a strong, affirmative, way that takes the offense.
Well, we're working on it. Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the top.
You know it's just the other way. Well, he can't do no more. He rich and you poor.
Welcome back to The World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service, reporting from Boston, Massachusetts. Businesses in Ebola-affected countries in West Africa received a small monetary boost today. The International Finance Corporation, a division of the World Bank, will contribute $450 million to the region, including $75 million to West African banks, intended to help them facilitate the import of critical goods. That stimulus will be critical, as the latest economic projections from the United Nations Development Program show that the ongoing Ebola outbreak is driving down tax and non-tax revenues and sapping exports from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Not far away, in the West African nation of Burkina Faso, UN mediators are being joined by the presidents of Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal to help negotiate a way out of the country's political crisis. Last week, Burkina Faso's longtime president, Blaise Compaoré, stepped down after massive street protests erupted ahead of his move to abolish term limits and seek office again next year. In the wake of Compaoré's departure, Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Yakuba Zito was appointed as a temporary leader by Burkina's military, a move that displeased many outside observers. The United Nations says a civilian-led transition government is needed immediately, and that continued stewardship by the military will continue to destabilize the country and the region. And in a dethroning of a less serious sort, Japan's Yamazaki Distillery has been named the maker of the world's best whiskey. According to the 2015 Whiskey Bible released by Jim Murray, Scottish offerings don't even crack the top 5. You have to pony up to get your hands on Yamazaki's single malt sherry cask from 2013. A limited number of bottles are still available online for about $150 each. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So it was today, back in 1922, a coal mine explosion in Spangler, Pennsylvania, killed 79 miners. And this is another one of those situations where, you know, just a few years earlier in 1918, the mine had been rated as gaseous. And one of those things that said, hey, you know, you probably shouldn't go down there. Probably shouldn't do that. Well, the new operators, people who took over the mine, had it newly rated as non-gaseous, even though there had been, you know, numerous occasions of workers being burned because of, you know, things lighting up. Well, 4 years later, 79 people killed. And, you know, you go back and you think about the issues that win. Worker safety being one of those winning issues. Be it, you know, fair wages, retirement security, health security, safety on the job, stopping wage theft, all of those solidly working class messages. That's where you need to be spending a lot of time. And that's, look, the wealth class has their party. You can't be half a party. And this is where, you know, I've had problems with Democrats since the Clinton years forward, you know, the DLC types we've got to be good to business. Well, look, you know what's good for business? Having workers who have decent wages so that they can buy the business's product, and thus more production, more profits. You know, any decent businessman, and this is why I'm glad Tom Wolf is now the governor-elect here of Pennsylvania, so that he can stand up with authority and say, you know what, that nonsense of more tax cuts is just that. This is how you run things, and I'm hoping the best for him, and whatever I can do to help move this state in the right direction, I'm all in favor of. Because, you know, and this is something I've talked about often. If you want to change the world, you start by changing your little corner of it. And if we can take Pennsylvania from 50th in job creation and get back up where we were into the 7th to 10th before Tom Corbett took office, what kind of messaging would that send across the country? That trickle down, supply side, voodoo Reaganomics, austerity, cut, gut, and punish doesn't work. And yet, you know, again, we go back to and look, and maybe I haven't made the case enough that Tuesday was going to be a beating anyway, just because of how things were set up. You know, of the third of the Senate that was up for election, 23 Democrats were defending their seats and just 10 Republicans. You knew, and the majority of them, as Robert Creamer pointed out, were in states that Obama did not do so well in. So the cards were stacked against Democrats from the start. And I think a lot of that had to do with the people staying home. And the other part of it is all the negativity, which, you know, if I can impress one thing on folks, all of that negativity should have you repelling from the person who the negativity benefits. That's the only way we stop this. You know, I was watching this. I was watching this series on. My wife subscribed to this Amazon Prime thing, where they give you a bunch of free TV shows and stuff to watch. And we were watching one of their specials with John Goodman. I think it's called Alpha House or something like that. And you know, it's about, you know, four senators who all live together, and you know the kind of, you know, frat boy shenanigans that they claim goes on. But in the one episode, you know, they went to the Sheldon Adelson type, and they were casino owners and from Las Vegas. So obviously they're the Sheldon Adelson people. And, you know, he said, you know, I need you to run some ads. And they just ran the most hate-filled, lie-infested piece of you-know-what that made John Goodman's character, you know, just, oh my gosh, what have I done? And this is what's gone on. We've allowed these outside groups. I don't know that I want outside groups involved in the campaigns. I want to see what each campaign can do. That, to me, that's how you run things. But you've got all of this outside, this dark money coming in and just lying. I mean, you go back to the Bush election in 2000. The push poll in 2000 in South Carolina, where you had the group out there making calls, push polling calls, going, would you vote for John McCain if you knew he had black children? Not because he does. He's got 2 kids, I guess, that he and his wife adopted. But, putting that seed in the South Carolina voters' mind that, that kind of just out and out dishonesty to me is dangerous. Which is why I think the money has to go. And everybody I talk to say there's just way too much cash in the system. Because I don't believe money is speech. I believe speech is speech. Simple stuff. Anyway, I can take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous. The salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about President Teddy Roosevelt's fight to save the American sport of football from being outlawed. After the 1904 season, the president called a meeting of the major college football programs to change some rules to prevent deaths, injuries, and violence. Virtually nothing new happened, and the president's son was injured as a freshman player at Harvard. At the end of the school year, Stanford and Cal switched from football to rugby, and Columbia, Northwestern, and Duke dropped their football programs. Harvard's president wrote that he considered football to be more brutalizing than prize fighting, cockfighting, or bullfighting. President Roosevelt dug in even deeper than the previous year. He wrote to a friend that he hoped to minimize the danger without football having to be played, in his words, on too ladylike a basis. Join us again for the president's efforts and suggestions. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Come on, ya good workers, good news to you I'll tell about the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Again, that's kind of, as much of the message of that was 100 years ago, it is still today. Which side are you on? And for me, Tuesday night was really about that. Too many Democrats, in my view, trying to straddle the line, not clearly on one side, but trying to go, let's moderate our position. Well, look what it got them. A thumping. Not that, look, I completely understand the political landscape was stacked against them from the beginning. But it's much worse than I thought it had to be. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about, there were some positives, I'm told, on election night. And here to talk a little bit about that, I've asked Zoë Carpenter. She's a Washington, D.C. reporter for The Nation magazine. Zoe, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me back.
So we look at the messaging, which is it was a slaughter. It was, this big wave. Then there were some good things that came out of it, huh?
Sure, yeah. So it was definitely a bloodbath for Democratic candidates, but there were some progressive issues that had pretty good results all over the country. Number one on my list would be the raising the minimum wage in 4 states, plus the Bay Area, San Francisco, and Oakland. So that's pretty significant. It's an issue that we already knew polled really well. But to see voters in red states overwhelmingly support that, I think is a really important victory for progressives.
And I think it's one of those things that the Democrats should have. And I was calling for the last couple of months, one of those populist type messages that, look, we're going to make government needs to make people's lives better. And the message needed to be, here's one way that we're going to help by raising the floor so that people at the bottom get a helping hand. And then, those next couple of tiers up, see the ripple up effect.
Yeah, and that was supposed to be one of the centerpieces of the Democratic campaign strategy, were a bunch of different measures around economic security, and that message got a little bit muddled with the crisis with Ebola, with ISIS, and then it was also made complicated by the fact that some Republican candidates like Tom Cotton in Arkansas also ended up coming around with some support for the minimum wage increase. If not at the federal level, but at the local level. And so there wasn't, Democrats didn't do a good job of drawing those clear distinctions between themselves and the right in terms of support for working people. And
you let people like Cotton have an epiphany during an election cycle, which was one of those things that just left me scratching my head. Because you go, where were you? Where have you been? Right. Yeah, it was. There wasn't a real clear message around those issues for sure. Yeah, I mean, and there were some things, and look, there were some things. The minimum wage, obviously, one of the big issues. Also, I saw a couple of areas push back on fracking, a couple of areas, pushing back on corporate personhood, which I think is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Well, and fetal personhood, too. That was a big rejection in Colorado and North Dakota. Voters rejected measures that would have protected fertilized eggs, and that could have obviously had severe implications for abortion rights, but also criminalized women who had miscarriages and just really opened the door for a lot of crazy legal attacks on reproductive freedom. Yeah, I often wonder how far they're going to go. Well, there's no easy way of going there, so we're not. But I wonder how far this ends up going, how crazy we're going to end up if you allow things like this to happen, which is why I'm glad, as you pointed out, these things were shot down. But as I understand, Tennessee, didn't Tennessee pass something? Yeah, so Tennessee passed a constitutional amendment that removed a constitutional protection to abortion rights. So that amendment itself doesn't change any laws or regulation around abortion, but what it does do is pave the way for the Republican-controlled legislature in Tennessee to pass those laws. So things like clinic regulations that make it virtually impossible for abortion clinics to operate within the constraints of the law. We're going to see those things come through the Tennessee legislature as they have in the surrounding southern states. And you point out in your article that, one of the good things came out, paid sick days in Massachusetts, which, again, another one of those messaging things I think Democrats should have grabbed onto. Yep. And that was one thing that I think candidates did talk about, but it got sort of lost in the attempt to run for the middle. Yeah, again, another one of those things that I've been talking about Harry Truman's speech where he said, look, you give voters the opportunity to vote for a genuine Republican and a Democrat that acts like a Republican. They're obviously going to take the genuine article every time. And he said, look, I only want genuine articles. And this is kind of what I've been saying. The Democrats need to find their message somewhere and hopefully soon, because there are issues out there that define them, I think. Yeah, and I think one of the big problems for Democrats is white working class voters, and a lot of people worried about turnout among minority groups in this election, and it really wasn't as bad as I think people were expecting. And so you can't just blame turnout. I think you have to think about why so many people feel like the Democrats don't support them, and not that I'm saying that they don't, but I think there really is an image problem there. And part of it is just the hatred of the federal government and hatred of Obama, but there's also problems with presenting the vision. And I think that speaks to larger issues within the party between the populist wing and the corporate wing. Well, I mean, you look here in Pennsylvania where, one of the very bright spots across the country is Tom Wolf is now the governor-elect. Tom Corbett going to be finding his way out of office in January. And I think, Wolf ran on a very simple message. We're going to tax the drillers. We're going to increase taxes, and we're going to invest in the future of the state. We're going to invest in education and a very good government kind of platform. And I think that resonated with people.
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania was a big bright spot for public education advocates. Corbett had presided over some really deep cuts to public school funding, and just a few weeks ago led a full frontal assault against Philadelphia's teachers. And the teachers' unions were big players in the election, and they didn't have a lot of successes, but Pennsylvania was one spot where someone who was really antagonistic towards public education, and that's Governor Corbett. He lost.
Yeah, I've been saying that Governor Corbett's going to be the guy who I think saves public education, because he finally woke people up. And you see the organizing going on in Philadelphia. You saw the organizing going down in the York City school district, where they wanted to charterize the entire district. And fortunately, the folks in that neighborhood rose up and said, "Nuh-uh, ain't going to happen." And they've kind of pushed it back. But I think the people have raised their head and go, "What? Privatize our school district? No." And I think that's going to be his legacy.
Yeah, I hope you're right about that. But I also worry that with Republicans now in control of Congress fully, we're going to see a lot of measures at the federal level around charter schools and privatization. And that's gonna create some real problems within the Democratic Party, because you do have a significant number of Democrats who support those corporate ed reforms.
I know, and that's scary, because the other thing that scares me is not just that with Obama and Artie Duncan, but also the trade deals that I fear are going to come about. When President Obama was candidate Obama, I sat 20 feet from him, and he said, "Trust me, I'm not going to pass those free trade agreements." And bang, what do we got? We got Chorus, we got Colombia, we got Panama. And we, you now see the job loss that came along with that, and the deficits we have there. So I fear, and thank you for bringing that up, but I fear you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the danger really is that the pursuit of getting things done and the pursuit of compromise is really going to lead to bad policies. And I think people should be wary of confusing getting bad things done with progress.
I'm with you. One of the other, I guess, bright spots, as you point out in your argument, 2 more states have legalized the use of marijuana.
Yep, and the District of Columbia, although because of Congress's jurisdiction over the district's legislation, Republicans could put a hold on that. But I think we're really seeing that issue resonate with voters on both sides of the aisle clearly, because it passed so overwhelmingly in the states. And in the district. And it's, I think that people sort of joke about it, but it's really a serious issue of racial justice and criminal justice. And so I think those are really positive signs. And we might see some more action around mass incarceration and drug policy at the federal level from people like Rand Paul on the right.
So maybe Aqua Buddha is going to come to the forefront here. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know about that, but maybe some progress here.
Because one of the things that surprised me, I got to be honest, is Rand Paul has really moderated some of his insanity, and he played nicely during this election, which kind of scares me, because there's part of me that goes, the Ted Cruzes and the Rand Pauls are going to be the crazies pushing and causing a divide, and maybe nothing gets done, and maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I fear that they moderate them and bring them into line to get what they want. That's a huge fear I have.
Yeah, and I think that wrapped up in this is presidential ambition. Someone like Rand Paul, if he's looking at 2016, he has some pretty questionable past statements on race, and so there's some question about how his turn towards issues of mass incarceration, how sincere it is. Not to discount it. It's great to have allies wherever you can get them, but everyone has their own agenda.
I mean, I think I have a friend who, he has a severe eye problem, and he tells me that when he smokes weed and he smokes pot, and because it relieves the eye pressure, and it helps him to feel better. And I'm going, I can't believe that you have to go and be a criminal to be able to get something that makes you feel better. It's just one of those insane things in my view, and the hope is that maybe this is the wave that undoes that insanity.
Yeah, well, it's insane, particularly because it's technically criminalized for everyone. However, the people who actually get punished for breaking the law are disproportionately Black and brown, and we know that. I mean, in the District of Columbia, for example, 9 out of 10 people who are arrested for drug offenses are Black, even though they make up only half the population, and are no more likely to use drugs than whites. So for me, that's the real reason to support marijuana legalization, even if you aren't a user, is just the basic racial justice side of it.
No, I never have, so I know nothing about it, and even if you legalize it tomorrow, I wouldn't do it anyway. But for those who do, I'm that libertarian streak in me. Is whatever you do within the confines of your four walls, that's your business, and as long as it doesn't infringe on my rights, we got no problems. And I wish we would think more like that in a lot of issues.
Well, it's interesting to see when people are for liberty and when they aren't. I think a good example is people who talk a lot about needing to free corporations and free money, and yet they don't support a woman's right to choose. There are all sorts of hypocrisy when it comes to liberty.
Yeah, well, again, you've got this crazy right-wing religious movement that really scares me. Pushing for these things because they want more voters. Have you seen this Quiverful movement?
I have not.
Which is just insane. I read a story not too long ago. A woman wrote an amazing article on how she broke free from this abusive relationship of this. It comes from a part in the Bible where it says something like, "May a man's quiver be full," and it basically you got to have 20 kids. The people on TV. With the 20 kids, they're part of this, and they're kind of like the folks that everyone looked to in this movement. It's an interesting story. I'll have to send it to you. But getting back to our conversation here, so we see the positive things. What do you think was one of the major screw ups? And I know you've written an interesting article on the immigration debate. Why do you think that was one of the big screw ups?
Well, there was a pretty calculated decision made by the White House to delay executive action on deportation until after the midterms. And that was widely seen as a political move to shield Democrats, particularly in purple and red states, from backlash. But that logic never made very much sense from a moral perspective, but also not from a political one, because it wasn't, the odds were already pretty stacked against the Democrats, and it wasn't clear that delaying this action could actually improve their circumstances. Meanwhile, it was totally apparent that permitting the mass deportation of citizens who are otherwise law-abiding or residents who are otherwise law-abiding, that would alienate many Latino voters. And indeed, that's exactly what happened, especially in key states like Colorado.
And I saw that on election night, George P. Bush was elected the land management guy in Texas, of which I foresee him being the face to bring Hispanics to the Republican Party, much like I see the woman in Utah being part of the face to bring African Americans to the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think that one of the lessons from the midterms is that Democrats can't count on their demographic advantage forever. When we looked at the exit polls among Latinos, what we saw is that it wasn't so much a turnout problem, but that the percentage of Latinos who were voting for Democrats across the country in all kinds of races was down significantly from where it was in 2012 and 2010. So, for example, Mark Udall in Colorado, it looks like he won the Latino vote pretty handily with 71%. However, that looks pretty bad when you compare it to the 87% that Barack Obama pulled in from Colorado voters. So that's a pretty big drop there. And part of the problem was not just the delay in executive action, but that Udall didn't really run on his strong record on immigration. And as a result, you had 47% of voters said they weren't sure whether he supported immigration reform.
That's not a good thing. And again, it's that whole trying to moderate for the election to try and play both sides of the fence, in my view.
Right, exactly. And letting the right define the conversation around immigration.
Yeah, and the money advantage, I think, plays part of that as well. But all interesting stuff to be considered for. Hopefully we learn the lessons and move forward. At least that's the hope. Zoe, it was always great. It's great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Have to leave. Unemployment runs out after just 6 weeks. How does it feel to be a budget cut? You're snipped. You no longer exist. That was the purpose of us in the computer. So we can read the facts and see a little run. See our chart, unemployment's going down. That ruins your life. It's our problem. Keep it going.
In the U.S. alone, the cosmetics industry pulls in some $70 billion a year in sales of what's commonly called makeup. But lipstick, etc., are not the only kind of makeup the cosmetic giants are peddling. For years, their lobbyists, lawyers, and PR agents have been making up facts, stories, half-truths, and whole lies to keep lawmakers and regulators from banning various cancer-causing, hormone-disrupting ingredients that their products contain. One especially nasty example of this is the continuing campaign by L'Oreal, Revlon, and the industry's Personal Care Products Council to keep putting formaldehyde in everything from baby wipes to hair straighteners. Back in 1981, the National Toxicology Program, an interagency scientific panel, first listed this noxious chemical as a likely human carcinogen. Cosmetic makers erupted with a volcano of outrage, and the NTP findings were buried. But the toxicologists, pushed by consumer and environmental groups, kept doing even deeper research, and in 2011, NTP listed formaldehyde as, quote, known to be a human carcinogen. That should have been that. But corporate lobbyists got their congressional puppets to assail NTP for flawed research and for interfering in private business. However, the prestigious National Academy of Science has been reviewing that research and has now unequivocally endorsed NTP's findings, even adding that the new research shows that formaldehyde may cause a much wider array of cancers than previously known. This is Jim Hightower saying, so after 33 years, the health of babies finally wins one over cosmetic profiteers, right? Not quite yet. Incredibly, Revlon and L'Oreal continue to balk at necessary reforms. To keep up and join the fight, go to www.ewg.org.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
The bar's still open, but man, it's slow. The tip jar's light and is low. The bartender don't have much to say. The regular crowd gets thinner each day. Some have maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and living in cars. Minimum wage won't pay for a roof, won't pay for a drink. If you gotta have proof, just try it yourself, Mr. CEO. See how far $5.15 an hour will go. Take a part-time job at one of your stores. I bet you can't make it here anymore.
I'll bet you, and that's one of those lines that just grabs you. Try working on what minimum wage pays, Mr. CEO. And, look, Mr. Big money Democratic candidate as well. What's interesting to me is you've got, and this is one of those things that, I've had a number of people point out, that you've got, these people, their hands don't get dirty. They don't know what it's like to have to shower at the end of a work day or their back to ache because they work too hard or any of that stuff. And I find it interesting that that most people just aren't identifying with these candidates. And I think that's part of it. They just don't identify with them. They don't believe that they understand their struggles. And part of this is all of the attacks on Congress and on politicians in general. Because structurally, and I guess it comes back to the fundamental makeup of our government. That nothing can get done when things are all factioned off, and that things would not get done as opposed to radical change. I mean, that's from the inception of our government. The idea is that the passions of the people would rage in the House, but the upper chamber was a little more cerebral. Let's take our time. Let's not get too hasty, and which is why everything seems to bottle up and die in the Senate. Which is the design. That's the point. If it's bad stuff, we're not going to have radical swings from one side to another. The problem is you've got those who want nothing to happen, who like the status quo and are profiting from it fairly nicely to keep it up, and then to even maybe push for more tax cuts and more deregulation and more bad trade deals, which I fear are coming. Our quote of the day comes from an article written by Eric Erickson, the guy over at Red State, who, and I'm hoping the Republicans follow his advice. He says, as the reality of a Republican wave becomes eminent last night, a dangerous narrative began to take hold among the conservative talking heads on cable news and in the victory speeches of the victorious Republicans. The narrative, he says, was that now that the Republicans have control of both chambers of Congress, it is incumbent upon them to work with Obama and the other Democrats in the service of, quote unquote, getting things done and, quote unquote, fixing the broken system. Erickson says, my hope is that Republicans reject this patent nonsense for the poppycock that it is. Not only should Republicans not work closely with Democrats, they should instead keep them as far away as possible, preferably across a large moat filled with sharp sticks, acid, and alligators. Acid and alligators. That's probably not going to be a very good combination. He points out that way our side will be safer from friendly fire when we launch the flaming tar at the remaining Democrats in office. That is what the radical right wants done. They want 2 more years of gridlock. They want more of the same, nothing getting done, our infrastructure crumbling, and basically our nation crumbling, so that they can, their team, their extreme portion of their team can then take over. And then we can live in that utopian world, much like Iraq, because that's conservative utopia. That's the world that they envision. No, labor unions are illegal. You can expatriate all the money that you want. There are no capital borders. There's no regulation. Do whatever you want. It's the wild, wild west that never was, but that they have these erotic fantasies of. And that's the kind of stuff that really scares me, that these folks, they could take control. And my fear is you've got Obama, who is, honestly and truthfully, they paint him as this diehard liberal. He's not. He's very much a compromiser. You look at his signature piece of legislation, Obamacare, which, look, I support it. I think there are things we need to make better. I would have preferred a single payer system. I would have preferred something very, very simple. If I would have written the bill, I would have just said, let's open up Medicare for everybody. Attach a price to it, put it up like any other private product, and let them compete. If the private sector truly, honestly, and truthfully can do it better and cheaper, let's see it. And then the consumer truly wins. That's never the case, but let's try. But for me, that Medicare system would have been great. Fix a price to it, let me buy into it, and let me write it off on my taxes like everybody else does. I mean, that's one of the ideas that I think the Republicans had the right idea. If I'm a single employee of my own company, I run my own company, and I buy health care, I should be able to get the same kind of tax break that a big company gets. Absolutely. That makes sense. But to have this Obamacare, which was really very much a compromise. It was Romney care. It was the answer to Hillary care, if you remember back in the 90s. This was very much a compromise, and it was brought to us mostly by centrist Democrats like Max Backdoras. So it's not surprising to me that we end up in these situations. My fear, and a huge fear that I have, is that the trade deals fast track goes right through. And the president signs off on the TPP, and we never know what's in it. We never get to know what's in it. There are some leaked pages, and I'm trying to get people to come and talk to us about the leaks and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's going to pass, I believe, along with, as Zoë Carpenter pointed out, the bad Education Incorporated stuff. That's coming. So there's a lot of stuff to mobilize around. And for me, this is a great opportunity for people to start coalescing around these ideas of we're going to save our public schools. We're going to fight back. We're going to fight for not just a minimum wage, but a living wage. There's a lot of this stuff that I think we can organize around and really make positive change on, and also hold people accountable. That's, to me, the answer. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to the Rick Smith Show.
Sitting there by the left turn line, a flag on his wheelchair flapping in the breeze, one missing and both hands free. No one's paying much mind to him. The VA budget's just stretched so thin, and there's more coming back from the Mideast war. We can't make it here anymore.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Working people will keep fighting for higher wages at the ballot box, in our workplaces, in our communities, and in the streets.
SEIU President Mary Kay Henry. For Labor and for Democrats, the election results Tuesday were disastrous. But while sweeping Republicans into office, the electorate also approved state minimum wages that put more money into the pockets of 1.7 million workers. Henry says fearless fast food and Walmart workers pressing their fight for 15 made that possible.
They had the courage to stand up for a living wage and create momentum all across this country, and made it possible for voters to endorse ballot initiatives. We believe that for families all across this country, a key takeaway is the progress that we made on the issue of raising wages for working families, so that we can have an economy that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. And raising the minimum wage was a winning issue in red states, blue states, and purple states. The economy isn't working for regular people in any of these places. And the message from folks was that we have to increase wages and make it possible to work one job and create a decent life for our families.
The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, says it's reached a $2.75 million Fair Labor Standards Act settlement with the Army Corps of Engineers. The grievance was filed in 2009 and asserted that about 1,000 employees were illegally designated as being exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. That law governs overtime pay. LIUNA Local 29F filed the grievance against the Kansas City District Army Corps of Engineers. In addition to paying out the $2.75 million, the union victory means that going forward, employees will be covered by the overtime laws. LIUNA President Terry O'Sullivan called it a wonderful victory that recovers millions of dollars for hardworking employees. A report from United Kingdom members of Parliament documents human rights abuses against tobacco field workers in North Carolina. The report calls on British American Tobacco and Reynolds American to end the human rights abuses in their supply chains. The Farm Labor Organizing Committee's Justin Flores.
We're going to continue organizing on the ground, building our union, and publicizing what's going on and calling on these companies to do something to clean up their supply chain. It's really important that folks know about this campaign and what's going on there nationally, so we can keep enough pressure on these companies and get them to do the right thing.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations for nearly a century. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I want Congress to pass a set of trade deals. Send a message to Congress to come to an agreement on trade deals.
'Cause they're selling make-believe and we don't buy that here. 'Cause in the real world they're shutting Detroit down.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. I got to tell you, that's one of my biggest fears. One of my biggest fears is with the Republicans controlling both House and the Senate on the national level, the trade agreements, not just the TPP, but also TAFTA. I see them both coming. It scares me, along with the more privatization of schools that There's a lot of stuff, but also on the state level. I mean, what's it going to look like? How's this new setup going to work its way out? You've now got the Democratic governor, governor-elect Tom Wolf, but also a radicalized, in my view, Republican legislature. One of those things that I got to be honest. I'm glad I'm not the guy on the front line there. But let me ask one of the guys who is. I've asked our good friend Abe Amoros, Pennsylvania Legislative Director for LIUNA, to come talk with us. Abe, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome, Rick. Thanks for having me.
So, a historic victory. Tom Wolf, in my view, had the right message. We're going to tax the drillers, invest, good government, all very positive themes. Question is, why didn't that spill over into some of the other elections?
Yeah, that's right, Rick. Unfortunately, it didn't. There were a lot of coattails that were being anticipated with the Tom Wolf victory throughout the state. But what we learned in a hard way is that there was no Democratic organization in place at the statewide level, which hurt the local parties as well. So you really didn't have that kind of buzz that you needed to have. You needed to have the troops on the ground. And outside of labor, Rick, there really didn't see a whole lot of Democrats knocking on doors for some of these candidates. So they really need to focus on the infrastructure in order to have a chance of regaining some of those seats that we lost in 2016. Because right now, the governor-elect has his back to the wall in terms of any of these major agenda items, such as education, pension reform, taxing the Marcellus Shale, with majorities in the Senate at 30-20 Republican and 25 more Republicans in the House than Democrats. It's going to be an uphill climb, brother.
You know, I've heard people say that, there's going to be a mood to kind of try and get things done, that there may be some, Tom Wolf, is going to reach across the aisle. But my question is if he's going to reach across the aisle, I know that, but are they going to smack his hand away?
Absolutely, Rick. I mean, this legislature, particularly the folks in the House, I don't see them extending olive branches in a sincere fashion, Rick. I see a lot of gesturing. I see a lot of hand movement. But I want to be proven wrong here, that it's going to be genuine, it's going to be sincere, and that these problems need answers from both sides. I mean, the House does not have a good history. The Republican-controlled House does not have a good history of working well across the aisle. And now that they're up by 25 instead of 17, I mean, Rick, it's hard to be in the ball game, brother. It really is. So I am just hoping that Tom can surround himself with really, really good people who know their way around the Capitol, who have good reputations in terms of getting things done, and hoping that we make very rational, reasonable arguments, because the problems out there facing Pennsylvanians are real, and they need to be solved in a bipartisan fashion. But we've heard that before. Yeah.
Do you think, as I do, that maybe what we need is a governor who's going to continue the campaign mode? An overwhelming victory against an incumbent never happened here in the state of Pennsylvania before. Historic, if you will. But do you think that, with this huge victory, that the right move would be for the governor to go, look, if we can't get an increase in the minimum wage, or to tax the drillers, or do some of the things that I think most people would like to see happen, do you think kind of a campaign to go, hey, I need help? Do you think that's what we may see?
Yes, I hope we see that, Rick. Again, it has to be a genuine and sincere effort to come to the table to talk about these issues in a rational fashion, so then we could actually do something about them. Because if we don't do that, it's going to get worse than it has been over the past 4 years. Now, thankfully, Rick, bad legislation has not taken hold in Pennsylvania, and that's because of our labor-friendly Republicans from the Southeast and a few out west who have been with us on working-class issues. Now that margin has gotten bigger for the Republicans, it's going to be that much harder to come to the table and say, look, we need to negotiate some things here. Now, the good thing, Rick, is that the Senate is not veto-proof. They can't just railroad us after Governor-elect Wolf vetoes any bad legislation that may or may not come out of both chambers. So we've got that in our favor. But I got to tell you, yeah, it was a bittersweet night. I'm glad we won the governor's residence. But Rick, when you look at those margins, I mean, it just chills went through your spine after looking at the numbers and how uphill a climb this is going to be for the governor-elect.
You know, at the end of this, though, Abe, don't we have to look at the gerrymandering and the districts that have been written, that have been drawn up? That, you know, I don't know if you looked at the numbers, but I spent a little time, you know, just flipping through the numbers, and I can't tell you how many 65-35 elections I saw in the places where there were races. I mean, I think there were over 100 people who didn't have an opponent, which I just think is unconscionable. But, you know, in any functional democracy that you would want to have, that we claim to be a representative democracy where you want participation, to have that many people run unopposed, to me is just unconscionable. But to see all of those 65-35 races tells me that something's there that created that environment.
That's exactly right, Rick. There's a lot of apathy out there. There are a lot of folks who don't think that their vote makes a difference, that their involvement makes a difference. And sadly, this applies in the Democratic Party more than the Republican Party, because the infrastructure has basically been abandoned for the past 6 months. Now, the Fresh Start Initiative was a good one. Obviously, they can claim credit for Tom's victory. But at the same time, the party stalwarts felt abandoned. They felt that they were left behind in many ways. So the governor-elect has the task of uniting everyone over the next 2 years. And I do believe that he has the interest and the resources to do that. He will surround himself with good people who know their way around the formal party structure, who can help him do that. And it's going to be so key, because if he does not get, if he doesn't have numbers, Democratic numbers, supporters in both caucuses who can help him, first of all, do damage control over the next 2 years and get him closer to his agenda in the next 4 years, he knows that the re-election is going to be that much more difficult. So from a strategic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to invest in the party infrastructure and going out there, sitting down with party chairs, talking to them, talking to their supporters, talking to the members of the Democratic State Committee, so then they could be brought back into the fold, because in 2 years, we're going to have a pivotal presidential election, and in hopes that that work will have paid off so we can elect more Democrats in the House and in the Senate to at least get back to the margins that we were at this year or 2 years ago, Rick, because right now we're looking at really grim numbers, and the work has to start today.
Well, I think the next 2 years, even if nothing does get done, I think one of the things that will happen is we'll see the priorities of this party, of the Republican Party. Even, you know, look, we've already seen the priorities the last 3.5 years. So I'm actually kind of surprised at the turnout. But, you know, you look at the creative drawing of the districts, that has an awful lot to do with it. But you know, you look at the priorities of this Republican Party the last 2 years, this last session, and it's all been about division. It's all been about divisiveness and selling off state assets. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that the Republican base is even paying attention to what's going on.
That's right. That's exactly right, Rick. I mean, the Republican base has really been snookered. And it's because the Republican Party at the state level and at the county level, they don't tell them what's really going on. They just feed them all these talking points. But see, they're organized. That's the problem.
Right.
They're organized. We're not. They could be wrong 100% of the time, and I happen to think that they are. But we don't have anything to counter them with. And it's like the old saying, you can't beat somebody with nothing or with no one. And in this instance, you can't beat their rhetoric without any rhetoric. You've got to have people pounding the pavement, talking about our issues, and you know, persuading folks as to why we're right and they're wrong. It goes back to organization. It goes to infrastructure investment, and a willingness, a sincere willingness to do that from the leadership. And I mean, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of those leadership elections that are going to take place on Wednesday, Rick. As you know, the House and Senate are going to come back so they can elect their leaders, and there's going to be rancor within their rank and file, no question. But it'll it'll be interesting to see who is really willing to help the governor-elect with an agenda, or at least making key arguments to make sure that working people are not left behind. Because, you know, the unemployment rate is healthier, but, you know, people are still upset about the economy as a whole.
And we're still last in job creation.
There you go. We're still last in job creation. So how are we going to get from 48th to 9th, which is where we were before Governor Corbett took over? I mean, these are the kinds of serious questions that cannot be pushed aside in favor of politics. But with those margins, brother, it's going to be really hard. So like I said, there's going to be no honeymoon period for the governor-elect. These discussions have to take place now. You've got to put good key people in those administrative positions within the state government that can help him as much as possible and forge those key relationships with the members, especially the leaders in both caucuses. And, you know, I made the suggestion that he should formally or informally meet with each of the 4 caucuses individually and see what their issues are, what they're thinking, what they want, what they don't want to see. And this is the time now to be conciliatory and with your hand out to see what common ground could be found, because with those numbers and margins, bad things could happen very quickly.
So basically what you're saying is next Wednesday, that'll be the first test to see what the priorities of the Republican Party are going to be based on who they put into leadership.
That's exactly right, Rick. I mean, the moderates in the Senate are in trouble. They're in trouble. I mean, my understanding is that the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Jay Corman from Center County, will topple Senator Dominic Pileggi from Delaware and Chester counties. It's quite possible that'll happen because of those numbers, the way they are. In terms of the House of Representatives, my understanding is that House Majority Leader Mike Turzai is interested in moving into the big chair as Speaker of the House, while the policy chairman, Dave Reed from Indiana County, is interested in becoming the Majority Leader. So, you know, I got to tell you, we've been lucky over the last 5 years that really bad things have been kept at the doorstep. But if they honestly realize, or if they begin to understand how to govern effectively, our issues could be in trouble. That's why this is the most dire moment for us as working people and members of organized labor to really get engaged and active on a daily basis. It cannot happen without some serious vigilance on our part now.
Yeah, and we've got to start organizing for the next election coming up, and that's
right, brother.
That's so important. Abe, I appreciate your insight, your thoughts.
You're welcome.
It's always great talking with you.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Abe Amoros, Legislative Director here in Pennsylvania for LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service, reporting from Boston, Massachusetts. Businesses in Ebola-affected countries in West Africa received a small monetary boost today. The International Finance Corporation, a division of the World Bank, will contribute $450 million to the region, including $75 million to West African banks, intended to help them facilitate the import of critical goods. That stimulus will be critical, as the latest economic projections from the United Nations Development Program show that the ongoing Ebola outbreak is driving down tax and non-tax revenues and sapping exports from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Not far away, in the West African nation of Burkina Faso, UN mediators are being joined by the presidents of Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal to help negotiate a way out of the country's political crisis. Last week, Burkina Faso's longtime president, Blaise Compaoré, stepped down after massive street protests erupted ahead of his move to abolish term limits and seek office again next year. In the wake of Compaoré's departure, Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Yakuba Zito was appointed as a temporary leader by Burkina's military, a move that displeased many outside observers. The United Nations says a civilian-led transition government is needed immediately, and that continued stewardship by the military will continue to destabilize the country and the region. And in a dethroning of a less serious sort, Japan's Yamazaki Distillery has been named the maker of the world's best whiskey. According to the 2015 Whiskey Bible released by Jim Murray, Scottish offerings don't even crack the top 5. You'll have to pony up to get your hands on Yamazaki's single malt sherry cask from 2013. A limited number of bottles are still available online for about $150 each. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about President Teddy Roosevelt's fight to save the American sport of football from being outlawed. After the 1904 season, the president called a meeting of the major college football programs to change some rules to prevent deaths, injuries, and violence. Virtually nothing new happened, and the president's son was injured as a freshman player at Harvard. At the end of the school year, Stanford and Cal switched from football to rugby, and Columbia, Northwestern, and Duke dropped their football programs. Harvard's president wrote that he considered football to be more brutalizing than prize fighting, cockfighting, or bullfighting. President Roosevelt dug in even deeper than the previous year. He wrote to a friend that he hoped to minimize the danger without football having to be played, in his words, on too ladylike a basis. Join us again for the president's efforts and suggestions. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous. The salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome to the new dark ages. Yeah, I hope you're living right. These are the new dark ages. And the world might end tonight.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So, you go back to this, and I got a couple of emails going, oh, you're just picking on Bush. No, the reality is a lot of the stuff that's going on now, most certainly the problem left to Obama by Bush. And the thing that gets me, and this is the thing that drives me absolutely insane, when you talk to people on the street, and I've had hundreds of these conversations, saying, look, you want to jumpstart the economy, you want to get people back to work, you've got to be investing in things. The stimulus that Obama passed worked. Problem was it was too small. The problem was it was too much in the way of tax cuts everybody got something of a tax cut, but they were weighted. And we gave more to the very wealthy. So you compound what Bush gave away to what Obama then gave away, and you go, wait a second. Are we supposed to think this works? But the stimulus worked. Problem was it needed to be bigger. And at the time, I remember going, needs to be bigger, a lot bigger. Needs to be chunky, needs to be healthy. We need a real shock to get things moving. And we didn't do it. And the sad reality is what we've seen is anytime we need something, anytime we, the people, need something, it's not there. We can't afford it. But we can build bombs and we can blow stuff up. We got money for war. We got money to bail Wall Street out. But we don't have anything to bail Main Street out. We don't have anything to push full employment. And, as I pointed out yesterday, since the recession, each and every year, and you've seen the Emmanuel Sayers, Thomas Piketty stat that since those 3 years after the recession, the top 1% took 121% of all new income. Do you know why they got 121%? Because they took some of it from you and me. But what's even worse than this is what you've seen is that top 1% each and every year have taken somewhere between, depending on the calculation, on the low end, about $2.3 trillion, on the high end, about $5.7 trillion. Now, you put the estimate of $2.3 trillion, the low end, that would pay for all of our social programs, all of it, the entire safety net, everything. But what we did is we made the choice, billionaire over hungry children, billionaire over senior for Medicare, billionaire over the poor and downtrodden and those on Social Security, disability, and food stamps for kids, housing for families. We made conscious choices that we were going to give the billionaires the money under the guise that we're going to give them the money and they're going to create jobs. And this is the theory. The theory is if we give everything to the top, eventually they go, well, we've got too much. We're gonna share some of it, or it just falls out of their pocket. Whatever. The bag eventually gets full. The table flows over something, and eventually it comes down to us. Yet that hasn't happened. And what I find interesting is you look at a number of the studies that I've seen. In fact, a new study out by the Center for American Progress points out that look, we're told that if we give them the money, there will be job creation. And what we found out is that none of the money that we gave actually went to job creation. What the Center for American Progress pointed out, a recent study found that less than 1% of all entrepreneurship came from the very rich or the very poor. 99% of the entrepreneurial activity in this country came from a middle class. Middle America. They're the job creators. Not the 1%, because they don't risk their money. Most of their money are tied up in very safe investments. And as has been pointed out by Market Watch, business startup costs made up less than 1% of the investments by high worth investors. Less than 1%. And to me, this is huge because we're told we give money to the millionaires and billionaires and they're going to create jobs, right? If we give them more, they will, if you give them, they will build it. Well, it doesn't happen. And you look at the reality. In 1981, and this goes to if you remember during the Bush years, this actually happened. We allowed companies to repatriate a whole bunch of cash at a much lower rate. They got to stuff their pockets. This actually happened. The companies then went and bought back all their stock, gave their CEOs huge raises, and everything was wonderful. They didn't create any jobs. In fact, we lost about 180,000 jobs in that period. But this just was one of those things that just shocked me. Just one of those things that grabs you and goes, wow. According to the Washington Post, in recent years, what we've seen, all of this money going to these business interests and these big companies and all of this profit going to, according to the Post, about 95% of the profits that companies get, they use to buy back their stocks and to hand out dividends to their other wealthy people. You throw that back to 1981, and according to Alternet, just 3% of companies, 3% of companies use their income to buy back their stocks. So what we've done, think about this for a second. What we've done is we've said, here, take a bunch of cash. Please create jobs with a bunch of cash. And they said, oh, sure, we'll take the cash. But they didn't create any jobs. They bought back their stocks. They raised the price of the shares. CEOs who were based on, hey, our performance because our stock price went up, they lined their pockets. And what did workers get? Well, screwed. And that's pretty much it. An absolute total screw job. to where now you've got in this country 47 people who have more wealth than 160 million. So if you make $53,000 a year or less, well, those 47 people make more than all of you. Which, most of the people I know are right below that level. So that, to me, that's a huge thing. And you talk about 160 million working people. 160 million people. Imagine if those people voted. Imagine if on Tuesday you got those 160 million people with pitchforks going, we're voting. And we're voting this kind of stuff out of existence. And imagine if you had candidates who said, we can't have this anymore. Imagine if you had a series of candidates who go, you know what? And a wave of candidates, much like the Tea Party, which, again, what I was hoping the Tea Party would have been. I had hoped at the beginning, and look, I've talked about this at great lengths. I had hoped the Tea Party would be the you've been screwing us for too long party. Didn't happen. But my hope had been that they would come with the pitchforks and say, look, we absolutely, positively, without question, want this stuff to stop. And I don't know what it's going to take to get to that point. I'm still very hopeful. But at the end of the day, when you look at these kind of numbers and you look at these kind of situations where we've given all this money away under the guise that they're going to create jobs, and all they did was turn around and enrich themselves, I keep going, when do we put people's heads on sticks? And for me, one of the very first things, and Democrats, listen up, the reality is Wall Street is the target. The first thing we should be talking about is a Robin Hood tax, a Tobin tax, a financial transaction tax, whatever it is, a sales tax, whatever you want to call it. If I got to pay, what is it in Pennsylvania, 6% on everything, virtually everything I buy, why is it that if I go to buy stocks, I don't pay anything? And if you're one of these supercomputer buyers, why do you pay apps? To me, that's the reason that you have a lot of these trades on fractions of a penny. I just read the other day, and this is one of those things that just really stopped me dead in my tracks. According to the Bank for International Settlements, back in 2008, they had reported that the annual trading in derivatives had surpassed $1.1 quadrillion dollars. If you had just 0.1% of that taxed, that would be $1 trillion. Think of what we could do with that kind of funding, what investments we could make in the future, what education we could provide for our children, what opportunities could be had. Problem is we're too stuck on, no, we just got to, if we give it to them, they will bestow it upon us, which I think is just crazy. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
This is the fate of American dream. I got the time now, you're going to cry now. Before I take a job, don't want to go wrong. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is the fate of American dream. This is the fate of American dream. This is the fate of American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
For many, the 8-hour day is the standard, but it wasn't always this way. The original American workday was from sunup to sundown, following the demands of an agricultural workday. Over time, the nation became more industrialized, and workers moved from individually owned, self-sufficient farms to factories, taking workers from their homes and families. Factory owners demanded the agricultural sunup to sundown workday, forcing workers to toil long hours in grueling conditions. Workers began to collectively organize in pursuit of more time for family, education, and recreation. The cry of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will grew louder. For a century, the 8-hour day was viewed as the holy grail of the labor movement, and for this hallowed vision, workers sacrificed, often with their blood and their lives. The first strike for shorter hours occurred in May of 1791 in the city of Philadelphia, where carpenters protested a day's wages, paying the same in January as was paid for a longer day in July. Chicago in 1886 was home to one of the largest showings of solidarity. Some 80,000 workers turned out to support the 8-hour cause. It was in Chicago's Haymarket Square that a terrorist bomb and the blazing guns of company-paid police cost policemen and numerous workers their lives and their blood. As a result of the Haymarket tragedy, 8 innocent men were tried and convicted for a crime they did not commit. 4 of the men were hung. The Haymarket Square tragedy was but one of many battles in which working men, women, and children shed blood, tears, and flesh in the pursuit of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So the president, I guess, stocking up on Canadian or Kentucky bourbon or something along those lines. Going to have kind of conjuring up the old days of Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Great, just what I need, because I'm telling you, folks. TPP, TAFTA, those are coming. More school privatization, that's coming, because we can find common ground. Great. Just what I need. More bad, more negative, more horrible in the name of compromise. Sad stuff. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in the grand town of Washington, D.C. and around the world. Ellen Ratner, Talk Radio News Service. Ellen, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So the Democrats took a thrashing, and I think the rest of us are going to get the worst part of it, because I got to tell you, I think TPP's done.
PPP?
TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement.
Yes. Well, the president, as you know, is going to Asia, and they said that they do not anticipate that this is going to be finished by the time he goes, that they did with the easy issues first and the difficult issues they have yet to resolve, which means that you're absolutely right, they're probably not going to resolve it.
Well, we shall see, and I'm worried. So, what do you think? A little Kentucky bourbon, him and Mitch elbow to elbow. Are we going to have kumbaya moments?
Well, the press asked what the 16 members are going to have for lunch tomorrow. These are Republicans and Democrats, and the 2 people in the press room shouted out bourbon, and somebody else said crow.
Oh.
It was a pretty funny moment.
That is a pretty funny moment. I mean, you got to find some levity in a thrashing like they took. And I've been taking the position, look, what happened to the Democrats is their own fault on a large scale, because, they tried to moderate and come to the middle and run away from Democratic principles, I think. I've been talking about the Harry Truman quote. You give voters a choice between a genuine Republican and a Democrat that acts like a Republican, they're going to take the genuine article.
Well, that's right. I mean, in fact, they will. And you're absolutely right. What can I say? What a mess.
Yeah, and look, the stage was set for a slaughter to begin with. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a worse setup, but they didn't help themselves much either, especially when you look at the immigration situation. You look at the Ebola thing. I still think the president made a huge mistake with the Ebola czar. He should have called the Senate back to confirm the Surgeon General. That's just off the top of my head.
Well, yes. The top of your head is again correct on all this. Listen, I think we are going to be hearing reverberations from a lot of this for a long time to come.
Yeah, well, I just hope it doesn't come into the really bad form of bad trade deals and more charter schools, but I fear that they may not. So let's find out what's going on. Silk Road 2.0, what's that?
Well, as you know, there was this Silk Road initially, and they caught the guy who was running it. He was running drugs, he was running guns, everything in a deep email or a website that supposedly the government couldn't find. They did find him. They found him in a library, actually, arrested him. Well, then I guess another young guy, 26 years old, Blake Benthall, allegedly set up another one, the 2.0, he called it, Silk Road 2.0, and his name was DEFCON.
DEFCON.
Can you believe that?
No, I absolutely can believe that. That's beautiful.
Pretty amazing.
And, again, you go back and you wonder, with all the war on drugs and the money that we've spent, it's, well,
way too much money.
Also, I understand there's another virus the CDC's paying attention to.
The other virus, yes, it's chikungunya. And I was just recently in Grenada, where at least 60% and perhaps more of the island has gotten this virus. Not a big problem if you're young. If you're 45 and older, the symptoms can stay with you for 2 years or more. It feels like you have terrible arthritis. I put on all kinds of 100% DEET like 3 times a day.
Wow. Remind me not to head to the Caribbean or South or Central America.
That's exactly the problem. And of course, everybody's trying to be very quiet about it because they don't want to ruin their tourism.
Yeah, that's horrible. And what are they doing about it? I mean, so it's not going to kill us. It's just going to make us feel really bad.
Really bad. Now, there have been something like 113 people who have died in the Caribbean with the virus, but they may have had other things, and then the virus just, put them over.
Yeah, just took them right out. That stinks. Now, it's another thing for my 12-year-old daughter to be concerned about because she thinks we're all going to die from Ebola. Now we're going to be really painful before we die from Ebola.
Right, exactly. Well, chick is something you don't want to get.
Wow. Yeah, I want no part of it. I don't want Ebola either, but, so...
Right.
Let's move along. I guess there's a humanist who's challenging the Navy to become a chaplain.
Yes,
What's that
this
about?
guy has a master's in divinity. He also has a doctorate of education, went to Oxford University. He was an instructor in history and theology. And basically, he is saying, listen, the Navy lets people in who believe in many gods, such as Hindu, as chaplains. Why won't they let us in? We have ethical views, and we're able to be chaplains. And the Navy is saying no. Interesting case.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, every once in a while I have someone on from the Military Freedom Foundation, or Religious Freedom Foundation, who talk, about this kind of extreme religious, views gripping our military. And
right,
you kind of got to wonder. I mean, I don't know. I fear that Boykin idea that my God's bigger than your God, and that kind of scares me.
Well, it does scare me too, and I think there are people who don't believe in God, who are humanists, who consider themselves ethical, and why shouldn't we let them be a chaplain?
Yeah, I mean,
if they're educated in it,
and there could be other humanists there.
Exactly.
But I guess you could run into the argument that then if we open the door for them, then everybody has to have a chaplain. And, maybe the Pastafarians are going to want one. I don't know if you saw the story from Nebraska where the guy's suing the Department of Corrections in Nebraska because he claims he's a Pastafarian and, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And he wants to be able to dress in traditional Flying Spaghetti Monster garb, which is a pirate outfit, I guess. And they've denied him. No big surprise.
Well, the issue is, though, this guy is educated. He's got a master's of divinity. He has an educational doctorate. It's not like he just put on some hat and decided he was the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and there is a much better argument for having it than not. So the White House had a briefing today?
The White House did have a briefing today. They do every day. The president's in town, that the president isn't giving his own press conference. So, yes, several questions came up. One, did the president write a letter to Iran? He did, not to the president of Iran, as I originally thought, but actually to the supreme religious leader, whatever he is. But the White House will neither confirm it or deny it.
Uh-huh. And so if they're not confirming or denying, we have no clue what was in it.
No, we do not. But the White House was willing to say that they are that they have shared intelligence information, but not military. They're not sharing military things.
Okay, well, I'm not against the idea of talking to people. I mean, during the Cold War, we talked to the Russians, had the bat phone. I'm not against not against talking to people we don't agree with. I'd rather talk to them than have us bomb each other.
So would I. Absolutely.
And you said that 16 leaders are going to have lunch at the White House tomorrow. Is that what I understand?
That's right. And when they were asked what they were going to eat, all the press secretary would say, well, there's no menu. And then two people shouted out, one was bourbon and the other said crow.
Yeah, that's huge. That's kind of funny. But what's on the agenda? I mean, I can't imagine that
the agenda is how they're going to work together and what kind of bills they're going to move forward.
And I assume, and I guess out of this, we'll kind of get a feeling of where the Republicans are going to go, because I have two very distinct thoughts. One, this is an opportunity for the Republicans to come out and say, hey, look, we're not crazy. We're going to push an agenda and kind of push it onto Obama to make him the bad guy. Or crazy's going to go, we want power, and there'll be that divide. So I think that it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the lunch.
That would be very interesting. But I think maybe a few of them will speak on the White House lawn afterwards, but we're not sure.
Yeah, I mean, because I was watching Rand Paul during this last election cycle.
Oh gosh,
and
he thinks he's running for president.
Well, he thinks he is, and he kind of toned it down a little bit. He kind of toned the crazy down a little bit. And I wonder if they can pull Ted Cruz into being less crazy. Whether the party could actually be dangerous. That's my fear, is that they get their act together.
Well, it would be, but I don't think you have to worry about that.
Yeah. Also, I
really don't.
Okay, good. That allays some of my fears, because I do think that you're going to see them work together. Because as I said earlier, my biggest fear are the trade agreements, the TPP, and the TAFTA, and also more charter schools, more of this education incorporated. Which I can see the Republicans coalescing around.
You mean charter schools that are run by corporations, not that are run by school systems?
Well, really both of them. Because the studies really haven't shown that they've worked, unless other than a couple of places. But to start, the for-profit charter schools, but also these for-profit operators like Mosaica and Charters USA that want to take over entire districts. That's the stuff that scares me.
It scares me too. I believe in traditional public education.
Absolutely. And I agreed with the original concept of charter schools, which is that the public schools would try different things. Like I'm a big supporter of the Montessori method, very hands-on, very experiential, because I think some kids learn differently. But once you started putting a profit motive into these schools, I think we've destroyed a big part of it. One of the statistics I use, last year in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia School District operated at a $70 million loss, yet the charter schools had a $171 million surplus. Why didn't that $171 million get into the classrooms, and where did it go?
Very interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it gets me crazy. But I fear those are two areas that Obama and the Republicans and a good number of Democrats could find common ground on, along with the grand bargain and screwing people on Social Security.
Yes, well, let's assume that the grand bargain isn't going to work, because I think hopefully the president will veto it.
All right, good. That
would be good news.
That would be good news. It would show something of a spine. So who didn't vote on Tuesday? I look at this and I've talked to a number of people who all of the negative ads and all of the money spent on that kind of just had people turning away. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, it depends on where it is. But certainly they didn't get a lot of young people voting. They got people who felt like their vote wasn't going to make a difference. And so you have to look at it almost state by state, in some areas, district by district, and what the issues were or weren't. So it's hard to just say people didn't vote and there's one reason. It's probably many reasons. You know, all politics is local.
Sure. I look here in Pennsylvania, about 500,000 fewer voters in the gubernatorial race than we had the last time around. And the The Republicans, basic landslide here. There's a 30-20 Senate, and I think they control the House by more than 25 seats as well. And I argue that it had nothing to do with the voters coming out. It had everything to do with the guy who had the surgical pencil who drew the districts because they weren't competitive at all. If you go down the list and you look at the races they were all 65-35.
Wow.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. And you look, we had 100 races that didn't have an opponent. And that's a huge problem. And I think it's indicative of the creative map drawing that went on here in this Commonwealth. And that's a huge thing. Let's talk about the deficit. I guess the deficit's gone down under the president.
The deficit has gone down. It's about 3% of the gross domestic product, which is what the president had promised. Some people are saying, well, we should have no deficit whatsoever. But then again, we're not exactly in a position yet after having that huge problem in 2008. Thank you, George Bush, that now the deficit just can't go away faster, with a blink of a hand. It has to come down gradually.
And you have a note here that the word Negro, what's going on here?
Well, yesterday it came out that the Pentagon is allowing people to be called Negro, referred to it. They took it from an old document. Well, it's not an old document. It's still part of a document by the Office of Management and the Budget. The Pentagon has rescinded it. The Office of Management and the Budget is still looking over things, at least as of this afternoon. I'm sure by this evening it will be gone.
All right. Well, there you go. See, government can do things.
Occasionally and fast.
There you go. Ellen, always great talk with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you.
Ellen Ratner, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
In the U.S. alone, the cosmetics industry pulls in some $70 billion a year in sales of what's commonly called makeup. But lipstick, etc., are not the only kind of makeup the cosmetic giants are peddling. For years, their lobbyists, lawyers, and PR agents have been making up facts, stories, half-truths, and whole lies to keep lawmakers and regulators from banning various cancer-causing, hormone-disrupting ingredients that their products contain. One especially nasty example of this is the continuing campaign by L'Oreal, Revlon, and the industry's Personal Care Products Council to keep putting formaldehyde in everything from baby wipes to hair straighteners. Back in 1981, the National Toxicology Program, an interagency scientific panel, first listed this noxious chemical as a likely human carcinogen. Cosmetic makers erupted with a volcano of outrage, and the NTP findings were buried. But the toxicologists, pushed by consumer and environmental groups, kept doing even deeper research. And in 2011, NTP listed formaldehyde as, quote, known to be a human carcinogen. That should have been that. But corporate lobbyists got their congressional puppets to assail NTP for flawed research and for interfering in private business. However, the prestigious National Academy of Science has been reviewing that research and has now unequivocally endorsed NTP's findings, even adding that the new research shows that formaldehyde may cause a much wider array of cancers than previously known. This is Jim Hightower saying, so after 33 years, the health of babies finally wins one over cosmetic profiteers, right? Not quite yet. Incredibly, Revlon and L'Oreal continue to balk at necessary reforms. To keep up and join the fight, go to www.ewg.org.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Exposing GOP half-truths, lies, and hypocrisy every weeknight from 9 to midnight. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So Andy sent me an email, linked to an article that, again, the top 1%, the very well-to-do, doing very well, thank you very much. And they point out the handful of CEOs. It looks like the top 20, top 18, top 20 CEOs in the country. People like Howard Schultz of Starbucks, people like David Cody, the guy who has locked out the Honeywell workers there in Metropolis, Illinois, because they want job security. They don't want to be replaced by outsourced labor, because after all, and this is one of those things that, again, I go back to the whole working class issue. Here are guys who work in a facility that one guy screws up, they all die. It's that simple, honestly. They make this UF6 stuff. It's uranium fluoride. They take the yellow cake uranium, the stuff that Saddam Hussein was supposed to get to be able to make nuclear bombs. Remember that? They take this stuff and they make it into what we feared Hussein was making. It's the only facility in the country that makes this stuff. And I got to be honest with you, if I'm one of the workers in that plant, I want to make sure that the guy next to me knows what the hell he's doing. Just a thought. They don't see it that way. They think they can have transient labor come in and out, and they can replace them with any Tom, Dick, or Harry. And they've tried and had a couple of accidents and stuff. But again, you've got this this oversight body, not so much. But you look at these CEOs like Cody, who evidently has a retirement package, or retirement assets of almost $150 million. Let that sink in for a second. Almost $150 million in his retirement account. And he's the guy who's saying, well, we don't want our workers to have retirement. Think about Starbucks. Do you think that the workers there have a large retirement benefit waiting for them at the end of 20 or 30 years of service? I would think not. And part of the reason why is you look at the guy who's the head of Starbucks, this Howard Schultz, $183 million stashed away for retirement. And you go, well, he earned that. I'm sorry. No, I don't think anyone's worth $183 million retirement package. Sorry, especially when your workforce doesn't have one. And you can go down the list, the Walmart CEO, this Mike Duke, $140 million. This McKesson company, their CEO, John Hammergan, $145 million. And just down the line of all these people who are just sitting on hordes and hordes of cash. And you go, well, they deserve that. They probably invested it well. These are the decisions of slashing jobs. These are the decisions of holding down wages. These are the decisions of going after government regulations and putting communities at risk. This is the reward. This is the money that goes into those pockets. And you look at just these top handful of CEOs. Between the 20 of them, actually the 14 of them, the story is just 14. Of the 14 of them, $1.3 billion. 14 people. And it's not class envy. It's not, being jealous. It's a matter of, as a nation, thinking about the good and welfare of the entire country. Is it right that you have the handfuls, 14, sitting on $1.3 billion in retirement, while the vast majority, and I'm talking the vast majority of working people, have nothing? This is what's just blown my mind about this last election. We have made politics about idiotic nonsense. We have turned the art of governing and this amazing experiment of self-rule into nitpicking and nonsense when we are being robbed blind. I mean, that's the thing that just grabs me. We're getting robbed blind. And yet, we're still stuck on gay marriage or stuck on, they're going to steal my gun. No, they're not. We're stuck on, well, he got something that I didn't. Reminds me of being a 6-year-old. It reminds me of, when my son was 6 and my daughter was 4, and the two of them would fight and bicker. That's what it reminds me of. And I got to think that as you grow older, maybe little sense, just a thought. Anyway, I want to thanks everybody for being here. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Again, check out the website, thericksmithshow.com.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide flood beneath the LIUNA sway, imperial, mysterious,